Please welcome to the stage Patriotic Millionaires co-founder and president, Erica PAYNE.
That was not that rousing of an applause. Come on, people. Like, good morning. Good morning. We've got some Broligarchs to beat, right? We're going to break it all down for you today. We've got an amazing program for you. We're going to start off. My name is Erica PAYNE. I'm founder and president of Patriotic Millionaires. We've got a wonderful group with us today here and online. Thanks for tuning in. Got a lot of work to do, and it is going to take everybody. So I'm going to talk us through a little quick, here's where we are, here's how all of this happened, and then we're going to dive deep into the details with some of the smartest people that I know. We put a fantastic group together to figure out what in the world is happening in America. Who knows what happens in a year and a half? 2026, what happens? No, we turn 250 years old. Our country is having a birthday. And as an early birthday present, we got Donald Trump and his companion, the Hamburglar, as our leaders. Great. And they're combined with about $1 trillion of nonsense, as far as I can tell. When they took that stage on January 20th, a dark day dawned in America. It's raining today in Washington, and I think inside our country is crying because of what has happened to us. We had an incredible promise. We hadn't realized it, but we were getting there. We were getting there. We've taken a big step back. $1 trillion, 3 people owning more, controlling more than 50% of people in this country. That's not what we were birthed for when people came over here and started this country. 250 years old. So if somebody just woke up and said, what in the world happened? Y'all remember that movie When Harry Met Sally? Right? They're doing the wave. He's talking to his friend. Harry says to his buddy, my wife has been cheating on me. And his buddy says, well, you know, they say infidelity is just a symptom of a bigger problem. Harry says, well, that symptom is screwing my wife. That's the way to understand what happened in America. I don't think I can do it in 60 seconds, but 60-ish seconds, I'm going to tell you what happened. 1964, after the Barry Goldwater defeat, a bunch of rich people got really pissed off because they saw that consumers were starting to assert themselves. They were starting to take control of their country. They said, we don't want this. They banded together. They built a network of think tanks, legal advocacy groups, media monitoring groups, all kinds of organizations that over time moved the entire country to the right. One of the main organizations, the Heritage Foundation. Joseph Coors started it with a $250,000 contribution in 1973. Before Reagan's first term, they issued their first mandate for leadership. It was 2,000 policy recommendations. Reagan implemented about 2/3 of them. For his second term, same thing. Here's a whole list of stuff that will make this country into their vision of this small, committed group of wealthy people who, what did they want to do? They didn't want to pay taxes, and they wanted to dismantle the regulatory state. So they built a network of institutions to make that happen. Fast forward, the second mandate for leadership, Reagan's second term, gave him a list of suggestions. He implemented about 30 or more percentage of them. Then we move forward to where we are now. Their 9th iteration, Project 2025. Who's familiar with Project 2025? Is that the kind of world you want to have when you turn 250 years old? No, it is not. But they have laid out a path of a dark and dangerous place that they want to take us to, and we're here today to stop them. But it wasn't just on the conservative side. I got to tell you, I also blame the frog. That scorpion said, "Let me on your back." And the frog said, "I will take you across the river." And the scorpion bit that frog. And that frog died, and the scorpion died. And ladies and gentlemen, our frogs need to make better decisions than they have made to date. Okay? Bill Clinton, the best Republican president since Ronald Reagan, implemented 3 policies: NAFTA, Wall Street deregulation, and welfare reform. Go to the Heritage Foundation's website. You'll see the welfare reform one. They're trying to step back from NAFTA. Majority of Republican votes. If you look at an overlay today of where NAFTA decimated the American economy and where MAGA is the strongest, they are an exact match. Wall Street deregulation, that wasn't such a good idea either. Then we got Mr. Hopey Changey coming in. Our group came together because he wanted to extend tax cuts for millionaires. That's when our group came together. Hillary Clinton made a bunch of speeches to Wall Street, $750,000. Joe Biden tried to reverse course, zero in on working people. And then Kamala Harris came in, and 4 days after, there was a front page story in the New York Times talking about how billionaires quietly press Harris on tax reform. She backed off of a pledge to equalize ordinary income and capital gains. So I understand people are upset about what is happening in America. But you cannot solve a problem if you don't first acknowledge it. And we have to acknowledge that both parties, for decades, have been controlled by moneyed interest who want to eliminate their tax burden, dismantle the regulatory state, and create what's basically modern day serfdom. That's what they're here to do, and people on the Democratic side were either complicit or confused. Let's just say that we'll say they were confused. So when everybody's wondering, what do all these Trump voters and Bernie Sanders voters have in common? 80% of them think we need a political revolution. Nobody on either side is happy. The only people who are happy are the people at the very tippy top, sitting on a big pile of money that they stole from a whole bunch of hardworking people. And that's why this country is in this spot that it's in. We're not going to be there for long, though, don't worry. But we got to understand it first before we can fix it. Here's what happened. Doesn't matter who's in charge. Tax rates for the richest people in the country go down. Started at 94% decades ago. Now we're down at 37% top rate. If you're making it in capital gains, it's 20%. Who has been in charge in Washington has changed countless times over these years. That tax rate on the richest people in the country has gone in one direction. Here's the estate tax when Ronald Reagan was here. There was a $600,000 exclusion and a 70% rate. Fast forward now, it's about $14 million, 40% rate. And who was the Treasury Secretary who said only fools pay the estate tax anyway? Here's a bunch of corporations. What's that big zero mean? Can anybody guess? That big zero is how much these corporations paid in taxes during one of the last years. Okay? Next time your FedEx driver comes to your house, your UPS driver, your Amazon driver comes to your house, you think to yourself, did that driver in his individual car drive more, or that company he's working for? Why is that driver in his personal time paying for the roads that Amazon is making money off of? So here's where we are. Got a typo here on our slide. Just want to point that out just so it's not embarrassing. Elephant in the room. Here's where we are. If you are a working person and you make $100,000 in a calendar year, you will pay $9,000 more in taxes than a rich person who clicks a button on an E-Trade account and sells some stock making a capital gain. $9,000 more for the working person. If you own a yacht, 2 Picassos, and a room full of gold coins, you pay less in property taxes than some person who owns a $250,000 house in a small town in Ohio. And if you work for one of the biggest corporations, those corporations are not paying taxes. We know this gig, right? But it's not just on the tax side. It's on the wage side too. This chart blows people away. Here you see these two lines. This is productivity and compensation going up in one direction, staying together. As everybody did better, everybody did a little bit better. Then they start to diverge. You see that big gap? Productivity goes up, wages stay flat. That big gap is a whole bunch of money that went in the pockets of the richest people in the country that should have been in the pockets of the working people, making them that money in the first place. 40% of people in this country do not make enough to support themselves. You know what they ought to do? They just got to quit getting those lattes. Everybody says you quit those lattes, you save enough money, you'll be rich too. These people are clearly buying too many lattes. This is the average expenses in Columbus County, North Carolina, where Patriotic Millionaires have been spending some time in the last few years. This is an MIT living wage calculator. It says this is about how much you need to live. Let's see this number up here. We got $3,600 a year for food. Who can tell me how much that is per day for food? $10. About 10 bucks. Okay? I want you to go out tomorrow and see if you can spend $10 and feed yourself. And in order to get to this standard of living, you got to make $40,000 a year. Okay? $20 an hour, $40,000 a year. 40% of our people make less than that. That's the median cost of living for a single adult with no children. 70% of people in America make less than the median cost of living for a single adult with one child. So basically, the vast majority of people in this country cannot make their lives work. And they work. What kind of country is that? What happened? Stomp your foot. That's a floor. You need a floor to stand on, a solid floor to stand on. That's what the minimum wage is, the wage floor. What is it legally possible to pay somebody? That's the floor. That's the floor that all of us stand on. In 1968, the minimum wage had its peak purchasing power. That's the same year that McDonald's introduced the delicious Big Mac, which Julia Child really liked herself, gourmet that she was. Back in 1968, you could buy 3.5 Big Macs if you worked an hour. Today in America, if you work an hour, you can get 1 Big Mac and another little bite of the other. That's not nearly enough Big Macs, I don't think. This is the CEO of McDonald's, okay? I looked up McDonald's. What are they paying these days? Well, the lowest wage they're paying is around $9. $9. $9 and $20. Y'all remember how you had to have 20 bucks? They're paying $9. So if you've got to have 20 bucks an hour to work 40 hours a week to make your life work, if you only make $9 an hour, how many hours a week do you have to work? 80. That's 80. That's time. That's money. That's time. That's money. They pay some people a little bit more. Average wage is 14 bucks. Is 14 bucks 20 bucks? No, it is not. You still got to work a lot of hours. And then everybody gets pissed off at you because you're not raising your kids properly. You're not showing up for PTA lessons. You're not doing all kinds of other stuff, because screw you. It's all about those lattes. Last year, Chris, our boy Chris, made $19 million. Good for him. That's a really, really good hourly wage, I got to tell you. 1965, CEOs to regular people, about 20 to 1. Started creeping up. 2023, about 538 to 1. And we've got CEOs on this list, 1,400, 3,000 times their lowest paid workers. Is this necessary? Is this necessary for our economy to function? Henry Ford didn't think so. In 1914, Henry Ford blew people away when he raised the pay of his workers to $5 for an 8-hour day. Henry Ford was an asshole. He was a racist. He was an anti-Semite. I'm sure he didn't like women, because none of them do. It all goes hand in hand, a little bucket of isms, right? He said, I want people to make enough money they can buy my cars. The equivalent today of what Henry Ford paid his people, $19.94 an hour. A lot of blue states like to commend themselves on the fact that they've raised minimum wages. Here are the minimum wages all over the country. Is there a number 21 on this? No. Every single place in America, if you work full-time, you are guaranteed not to be able to support yourself according to the law. The law does not require the people you work for to pay you something you can live on. Southern plantation owners thought they were good business people too. Can't you just picture them sitting around with those cigars, talking about how good business was this year? Woo! You don't have to pay somebody, right? If you're running a business and you're not paying somebody something they can afford to live on, you don't have a business. You have a human exploitation scheme. And we need to all get that straight. So when lawmakers want to start saying they want to protect small business, first of all, they don't understand math because our economy is 70% consumer demand, so we need people with money to spend. Okay? So that's just stupid on the get-go. But even more so, you're saying, I've got to prop up a system that exploits human beings. I'm a lawmaker, and that is what I'm going to do. I'm going to protect these business owners. We have an extreme concentration of wealth at the top. This is the Gini coefficient. It measures inequality in the country. Looks like it's been going up. Economic Jenga, the wooden block game. You pull it from the bottom, you pull it from the middle, you load it on the top, the whole thing falls down. The human cost of this is staggering. 2.5 million people addicted to opioids. Deaths of despair, deaths due to alcohol, suicide, and depression, the highest they have ever been. And for the first time in American history, life expectancy is going down for segments of our population. And you wonder why people are so pissed. They're sad, they're scared, they're angry, and they look out there and nobody's out there to help them. Not the Democrats, not the Republicans, not the independents, nobody's out there to help them. Who's going to help these people? I think some people in this room are going to do that. 15 years ago, in 2010, during the lame duck session of Congress, President Obama decided he was going to cave to Republican demands to extend the Bush tax cuts, and that pissed me off. And it pissed off 56 other millionaires who signed a letter that said, for the good of the country, raise my taxes. It exploded in the media. We got all kinds of comments. One person wrote in, these people are kind of like Batman. Another guy wrote in, he said, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know anything about taxes? We looked him up on a Google search. In jail for tax evasion. 6 months. All right? So 2 years after we started the whole tax thing, tax me, proud to pay more. We started focusing on wages. We launched a campaign called the Smart Capitalist Campaign. Smart capitalists demand prosperity in an economy that is 70% consumer demand. You need customers with money to spend. If you own a bar, what should you care more about? How much beer money your patrons have in their pocket on a Friday night, or how much you are paying a single bartender? You need to worry about those patrons. When the bartender walks out, he stops being an employee, he becomes a customer. We need customers with money to spend. Taxes and wages, people, taxes and wages. It's the bookends, they hold it all together. So what topples them down? Political power and money. Taxes, wages, political power. That's what we focus on. Tax the rich, pay the people, spread the power. We're here to share the problem, expose it, amplify it, shout it from the rooftops. That's why we're hosting this meeting today. We argue with politicians all the time. And I'm going to enlist you all here in this audience and online to start harassing those politicians in a very focused, deliberate way that will actually fix these problems we have. 3 years ago, during a global pandemic, when everybody was like waving their pots and pans supporting working people, and then all Republicans and 8 Democrats refused to give them a $15 inadequate wage and a COVID relief package, because while you might be essential, you sure as heck are not essential enough for me to pay you something you can live on. That's what all the Republicans said and 8 Democrats. So I called Morris and I said, we're going to West Virginia. He said, we're doing what? We went to West Virginia, we went to Kentucky, we drove all over the place, talking to people about wages and taxes, stopping them in the Dollar General parking lot. And then we decided to focus. We went to a little town in North Carolina called Whiteville that had been decimated by NAFTA. We went to a little town in Wisconsin called Richland Center. And we started gathering people together. We were showing them, here's how the economy is rigged. Come together, Republicans, Democrats, independents. Doesn't matter who's in charge, working people are getting screwed. You all need to gather together. We've spoken at the World Bank. Abby spoke at the Vatican. We've testified in front of the Senate, Finance Committee, the UN. We've written 2 books, Tax the Rich, How Lies, Loopholes, and Lobbyists Make the Rich Even Richer, Pay the People, Why Fair Pay is Good for Business and Great for America. We made a movie about the project we're doing in North Carolina. If y'all are looking for a way forward with all the facts and figures you need, and if you want to see what people out there really want, we can help you know that. 71% of people think the economy is rigged against them. I'm not sure what the other 29 are thinking, because the 71% are right. This economy should be judged on how well it takes care of people, not on how many billionaires it prints in a calendar day. Every great country starts with a great economy. How do we get there? They asked Michelangelo how he made David. He said he just cut away all the parts that weren't David. Sounds like a good idea. They say a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. I say no, it doesn't. The journey of 1,000 miles, if you're going to get somewhere where you actually want to get, starts with a destination and a map. This is our map. America 250, the money agenda. This is about money. This has always been about money. It will always be about money. So if we're going to argue about anything, let's argue about the money. America 250, the money agenda. 4 ideas. First, eliminate the tax burden up to the cost of living for a single adult with no children, $40,000 a year about. I got a bunch of millionaires in this room. We want to shift the revenue that we lose from these folks up to people who make more than $1 million a year. There are a bunch of y'all in this room. You willing to do that? Yeah. Are you proud to pay more? Yeah. Proud to pay more so the federal government no longer taxes people into poverty? Proud to pay more so that working people have some money in their pocket? Proud to pay more so that this country can become the stable, amazing place it was always meant to be? Are you proud to pay more for your country? That's number 1, the cost of living tax cut. And if there is a politician of any party who thinks that working people should not be able to support themselves while rich people are flying rockets to the moon, you tell them they need to find another country to move to. Second idea, Cost of Living Wage Act. Median cost of living is about $21 an hour. Let's raise the federal wage floor to the cost of living for a single adult with no children. And then as AI and automation continues, we'll move that up. Should support more people, fewer hours. That's where you go. That's how you build heaven here on earth. The Equal Tax Act. If you make more than $1 million, I don't care how you make it. You're paying the same rate. Money is money is money is money if you inherited it, if you made it in the stock market, if you worked for it. And last, the Anti-Oligarch Act. with a specific focus on the Broligarchs because they are particularly irritating. The Anti-Oligarch Act will tax the oligarchs in order to make them less rich. In order to make them less rich. There is a point where money is no longer money. It is power. And they are using that power to screw life up for everybody else. And if they can't control themselves with those piles of money, we'll make sure they don't have a big enough pile to get in trouble. You can have a Lamborghini. What other kind of fancy cars? You can have all that, but you can't have our democracy. Absolutely not. You can't, and it's kind of stupid. It's like it's like enough already. Okay, this is just actually a stupid way to run an economy. It's a stupid way to run a society, and enough already. We've had it. Okay, we've got it. We got it. It doesn't turn out well. Here's what we're not going to talk about ever as patriotic millionaires. We're not going to talk about all this stuff that everybody else wants to talk about. People talk about transgender, LGBTQ, guns, everything that makes everybody get mad at everybody else. The bathroom bill in North Carolina, y'all remember the bathroom bill? Yeah, the bathroom bill was a minimum wage bill. Charlotte tried to raise the minimum wage. The state lawmakers didn't want them to raise the minimum wage. They couldn't get enough people to stop Charlotte from raising the minimum wage, so they wrapped it in a transgender bathroom issue so that Franklin Graham, Reverend Billy Graham's boy, so that he would get on board with it. It's never had anything to do with transgender people in the bathroom they use. This always had to do with money, because this is always about money. This is what we're going to do, patriotic millionaires. We're going to focus on the money. Focus on the money. And then we are going to flood the red zone. We are going to go into the places where people have been left behind, and we are going to tell them that there is a better way for them. America 250, we can build the country that we meant to build when we started out almost 250 years ago. It is possible. It's not even hard. It's math. And it's addition. It's not like it's fractions. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, this is not difficult. We're here to win both showcase showdowns. We want to get rid of the dirtbags in charge right now, and we want to replace them with people who are going to actually fix the problem. We're here to fix the problem. Thank you. And buy a t-shirt. Wear your values. All right. We have a fantastic slide. As I call my panel up here, Damon Silvers. I love these folks. These are great. We're going to talk about happily ever after or irreconcilable differences, the inherent tension between capitalism and democracy. As our folks come up here, Damon Silvers, Senior Advisor to the AFL and the AFT. John Driscoll, Patriotic Millionaire, Chair of Magnit Global. He employs 700,000 people, and he is the author of Pay the People, Why Fair Pay is Good for Business and Great for America. And Elizabeth Wilkins, President and CEO of the Roosevelt Institute. So we're trying to have a capitalist democracy, and instead we have a kakistocracy, a government run by the worst, least qualified, or most unscrupulous citizens. That's our first vocabulary word for the day, kakistocracy. Let's say it together, kakistocracy. Excellent. So Damon, I'm going to kick it off to you. Can capitalism and democracy coexist, or are we looking at the benefit of tragic love stories?
Oh boy. So, okay. Well, first, good morning, everyone. And it's great to be with all you millionaires and a few other friendly faces. Let's talk for a second. I've got two fabulous people here with me, John Driscoll and Elizabeth Wilkins, who in quite different ways are experts in this question, and who speak for, in many ways, the best traditions of American society. And so in a minute, you'll hear from them on this question. My mandate from Erica was to try to frame this conversation a little bit. And here's, let's start the way that I just taught this class in London called Rethinking Capitalism. And the first thing we did when we rethought capitalism was to ask the question, what is capitalism? And I'm going to give you a one-sentence definition, and then we're going to talk about democracy and what the problem is. Okay? So capitalism, which I think you all know, but may not have thought through, capitalism is a social, political, and economic system and cultural system centered on the creation of capital out of things, ships, land, machinery, and the centering of all activity on accumulating more of it. And the higher and the control of economic activity by those who control the capital. Pretty straightforward. And it's enormously successful, by the way. There's just incredible data on the expansion of wealth and economic activity since kind of capitalism came into being in about 1500. Now, what's democracy? Democracy is the idea that more or less ordinary people should run things, and that there should be rules, rule of law, and a certain amount of freedom to enable that idea of ordinary people running things to be real and not a sham. And this is very important right now. Now, if you think about it for a second, these two things are in inherent conflict. They are in inherent conflict because if everything is being run by those who've accumulated a lot of capital, how can everything be run by ordinary people on a more or less equal basis? And it's actually worse than that. All right? It's actually worse than that. The ideology of capitalism, not the actual thing, but the ideas that have motivated capitalism in its kind of what you might call unregulated period. Although I think we have to be very careful about the use of the term unregulated. Because as my colleague Mariana Mazzucato says, the state is always involved. Markets are always being shaped. Right? And the paradox of libertarianism, of sort of extreme capitalist ideology, is the following thing. Libertarianism says we should all be free to do whatever we want. But somehow libertarians seem to always be associated with fascists, with people who use force to make sure that you don't do whatever you want. Now, why is that? Why is Pinochet, people remember Pinochet in Chile, a military dictator who murdered and tortured thousands, why is Pinochet a libertarian hero? He is. He is. Milton Friedman was a buddy of his, right? He's a libertarian hero. Here's the reason. If you believe that you have a God-given right to do whatever you want with your property, in a democracy, people tend to get unhappy with that for some of the reasons Erica put forward. Right? The actual lived reality of the wealthiest and most powerful people doing whatever they want to accumulate capital will provoke a democratic backlash. But if you believe you have a God-given right to do whatever you want, then you believe you are entitled to ask the military and the police to crush the people who want to restrict your God-given right to do whatever you want. And so libertarianism has, in reality, an ideology, a capitalist ideology that starts out with the idea that we're all free, right, ends up with the jackboot. And this ought to have a familiar ring to you right now. All right. Now, what do we do about this? The truth is that this is not hopeless. This is not hopeless. We can have a capitalism and democracy that are compatible and work together. But it requires political mobilization. And it requires the government playing a certain kind of role. And it's kind of the role that Erica talked about. And we've been through this whole process once before in modern history. In the late 19th and early 20th century, quote, unregulated capitalism, meaning actually capitalism regulated for the benefit of capitalists, right? Regulated with the army and the police, right? Unregulated capitalism hit a terrible crisis, right? Which led initially to the Russian Revolution, the First World War, the Great Depression, the Second World War, and then global society tried something different, which is essentially what we might call the New Deal order. It has you call it other things, but in the United States, it's the New Deal order. That order was largely dismantled in the neoliberal era starting in 1980, and now we are essentially repeating the same process. The question is, and I'm going to stop here and put this question by panelists who in different ways live this. The question is, and it's a question you always have to ask in conversations like this, it is not enough to say, well, our economy and our society would work better if it was less unequal, if we had higher tax rates, if we had more regulation of financial institutions, if we had if workers had more power. It's not enough to simply say that. You have to have political power to get it done. You have to have some notion of where the power is to achieve things, and where there's enough power to counteract the oligarchs. You have to have not just a theory of what we must do, but how we will do it. Now, the stakes, I'm going to close on this and then turn this over to my panel. The stakes here are incredibly high. Probably obvious this morning how high they are. The functioning of democratic capitalism is in doubt. And we really need it to function right now because we have challenges that are outside our experience. The most serious being climate change. We have to have a society capable of acting together. We have to have a state capable of representing the interests of the society. And we have to have it now. And so the challenge here to this group, which is an extraordinary group of people, in terms of people who understand and participate in the capitalist system, but understand that it has to be one that works for everyone and is actually democratic, as opposed to nominally democratic. You have a unique role to play here, but it will not be possible, I would propose, and this is on this note I'm going to turn it over to John. It's not going to be possible for the people in this room to achieve this by ourselves. Right? Think about where does the power come from for this enormous fight. With that, I'm going to turn it now to John, who is somebody who's actually been a capitalist. And who has this, and I think you know this, but John has this extraordinary record of having voluntarily, as the head of a large healthcare organization, effectively kind of doubled the wages of the lowest paid people. Yeah, more than doubled the wages of his lowest paid employees. And I want to ask you, John, to start off, because this is sort of an experiment in like the New Deal in one company. How did that work as capitalism?
I mean,
and what does that mean for our democracy?
Well, I think part of it is what I did in my company is it was really in deep trouble. It was over levered. The company had lost 80% of its value, and I came in. It's a healthcare services business, and one of the first things I found out is that like many workers today, I had employees that were one employee living in her car with her kid. I had employees that couldn't afford diapers. I mean, the practical day-to-day reality of my entry-level service workers was so insanely difficult that I made the decision to freeze executive salaries and move everybody up to $15 an hour 14 years ago, and then put a reasonable cost of living inflator. But a little bit like I think the place we're in politically, Damon, I sold a story that unless we were all in this together and people could actually earn a living wage, that there was no way we would get off this habit trail of kind of, or maybe running up the down staircase of life where there was, we could not have people actually deliver at work the service level and care that we needed. It was inconceivable to me. And the first place to start was to freeze executive salaries. And when we went through difficult times, actually, executives took salary reductions. I felt very strongly that the only way that we could succeed to survive, compete, and win as a company is if everyone felt like they were in it together. But it started with a very telling a story about how this could create a bigger win for all of us if we could equally participate and lean in. I mean, only 30 to 40% of all people at work say they are engaged at work. There's an entire engagement industry that executives pay for to actually talk to their employees as to why they're not engaged. Well, let me tell you, if you are working 2 jobs, 1.5 jobs, 3 jobs, if you're worried about the feeding your kids twice a day, there's no way you're going to be engaged at work. So I think it starts by telling a story of a path to success. And we had over the next 10 years, we tripled the size of the company and quintupled the value, and actually put in profit sharing for our employees, so that we kept reinforcing this notion that if we all lean in, we will all win. And I think that's the part of the American story, and the capitalism that can work for all of us, that's been lost, and actually that's been stolen from us since the neoliberal reversion of the 90s. And I think we need to take the kinds of things that I did at my company, explain that we can do it as part of the American economy, and we did from 1938 well through the 80s, where when, as Erica pointed out, as productivity went up, as the American worker delivered for the American economy, median wages went up. But that stops in the middle of the 80s.
So can I just ask, is it possible to put that slide back up, Erica's wage productivity slide? Is it possible to just click back to it?
They were
John,
great slides, Erica.
John, so while we're clicking, can I just ask you, what in your view, why is it that you are unusual? Why doesn't everybody do this? Why doesn't business spontaneously pay a living wage in the United States on a large scale, which, as Erica went through, business does not? There we go.
Yeah, there it is. There is. This is the point here.
Yeah.
Is that we can do it. We did do it, and it worked. It was a much more inclusive capitalism. It was the greatest rate of GDP increase. By including everyone, it fueled an economic success that was where we dominated productive quality. We actually dominated the world economically, and I think an elemental part of that was getting the best out of every part of America. Why? So I think that there are. I mean, I don't have a great answer, Damon, other than there are periods where bad ideas are like fever dreams, and they take over groups of leaders and elites.
Bad money drives out good.
I think, and in the same way that the New Deal was a revolution, the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, all of the different regulatory regimes that came in, the fact that it was inconceivable that we would not have child labor until it was inconceivable that we did. That we are in a dark moment, but there are alternatives, paths forward that can lead to extraordinary prosperity, but only one where everyone is dealt in.
All right. Well, John, that is the perfect segue to our third panelist. It is such a pleasure and a joy to be here with Elizabeth Wilkins, the newly appointed president of an institute with a name that has a certain resonance in this conversation, the Roosevelt Institute. Elizabeth, can I ask you to just pick up exactly where John left off and talk about your sort of vision of how we make capitalism and democracy work together, and what we learn from the legacy of the person whose name is on your institute.
Yeah. Is this on? No. Thank you. No. Does that work? Okay, great. So that was kind of the perfect segue. Bad ideas are like a bad fever dream. I'm going to have to use that in my stump speech for Roosevelt and what we do. So I do want to take on this question of why don't more businesses do what you did, and more broadly, why ideas matter for making capitalism and democracy work together. This question of where power comes from, and one of the answers, not the whole answer, but one of the answers is that ideas matter, and that the ecosystem to make certain ideas the common sense are incredibly important to making sure that we have a world in which businesses are incentivized to do just as you did. I want to take you back to a time that must be unimaginable, a time when The viability of capitalism and democracy was in question. When people had lost faith in financial markets, and when people were really questioning whether our system of governance could deliver a basic sense of economic security and prosperity for ordinary people. It's a time we've been talking about.
Was that last night?
Yeah, yeah, feels familiar, correct? No, I'm talking about the moment when Franklin Roosevelt was inaugurated as president. He was walking into a world where the common sense was that government did not intervene strongly in markets, right? Where the common sense was something that Herbert Hoover had been doing, which was asking politely for groups of business leaders to voluntarily step up to help coordinate a response to an economic crisis, and it wasn't working. And Franklin Roosevelt came in with a group of so-called brain trusters, a network of thinkers with a set of new ideas about how the economy worked and about how government could enact a program of economic policy. And they changed the way we thought about the interaction between democracy and capitalism, right? A couple of things that we would do well to remember in this moment. One, they brought with them the idea that government could intervene strongly and substantially in markets in favor of the public good, right? That they could regulate capitalism to be more transparent, more predictable, and that they could control the excesses of corporate power in a way that made sure that markets produced for the public good. And at the same time, as we talked about with the Fair Labor Standards Act, with the National Labor Relations Act, they came in with the idea that actually we needed a government that could support the development of worker power, both the power of exit, that you could go find another job, and the power of voice, that you could have a say in bargaining in your own workplace, right? They could both control corporate power and support worker power, and that was an appropriate role for government. An appropriate role for government was to tax and invest, right? To use the tax system not just to raise revenue, but to curb the excesses of corporate wealth and individual wealth and invest in building things that we needed to support a good economy, and in public jobs and public works, to invest directly in people's working lives, right? And then lastly, they believed that we actually needed a social compact, that people needed to be protected against the vicissitudes of life, and that was a key part of maintaining ordinary people's faith, both that their economy was going to deliver for them and that their government had to play a role in making that happen. That was the sort of essence of the New Deal order. That we could, somebody said this to me recently, shave off the rough edges of capitalism in a way that we could ensure that everybody shared in the benefits. And we had enormous growth, enormous shared power and wealth in the economy, and we lost it again, but that chart which showed wage growth and productivity rising together, right? That was a reign of a set of ideas about what it took to avert crisis and maintain our economy and our democracy. Now, what happened at that moment where all of a sudden those lines begin to diverge? You can tell a story about sort of the global economy, you can tell a story about inflation, you can tell a story about another crisis, but you can also tell a story that Erica started to tell about ideas, right? And about groups of people who were interested in breaking apart that common sense and creating a new one. You can tell a story about groups like the Heritage Foundation, the Federalist Society, other groups that got together and said, do you know what? If we put in place a different governing order, we could unleash a set of governing institutions, a set of regulations or lack thereof that would allow for greater concentration of wealth in the hands of the few. And that's what we got. That's what we got, right? We got deregulation. We got disinvestment, we got hollowing out of state capacity to do the things that the New Deal order asked government to do. I give this history because I actually think it is a hopeful one. It gives us some agency in this story. We are at a moment where the common sense is breaking down again. The 2008 financial crisis again undermined people's faith in the ability of our democratic society to control capitalism in a way that produced markets, that produced public goods. That was actually the product of 40 years of that disinvestment. And we are now at a moment where people are looking for different ideas. The bad version is that a undermining of people's faith in democracy leads to authoritarianism. The good version is that we get together to think about what we need in terms of power, the ideas and the people, to create a new common sense, one that brings us back for the modern era to that marriage of democracy and capitalism, where democracy shapes markets for the public good.
So that's fantastic. I want to tell a little story, a very quick little story, and ask the panel to respond. Erica put a picture of Henry Ford up there a few minutes ago. It's very well known that Henry, and there's a little story that pushes on both of you a little bit. It's very well known that Henry Ford paid a $5 wage when there was a very tight labor market and he needed skilled workers during the teens. What's not too well known is that when the Depression hit, he laid off 100,000 people. And when those people marched on his factory begging for food, he had guards open fire on them with machine guns. He then had a secret police force that Elon Musk would be proud of, that surveilled his workers and physically attacked anyone who tried to form a union. In the course of the New Deal, the United States government essentially forced him to recognize the United Auto Workers. And then he did, although he was kind of pushed out in the process. And other people took over the Ford Motor Company, his children, who proceeded to build an extremely productive collective bargaining relationship with the auto workers that's lasted for a very long time. It's the best relationship. Those are three faces of capitalism. What does that tell us about how democracy and capitalism can work together, and the role of business?
I think we're at an inflection point, and Elizabeth mentioned it. What's important for business to realize, since we appear to be run by the trade equivalent of kamikaze capitalists, and I think they're front-running the fears that we feel that are going to drive through the rest of society, that there is a positive, inclusive alternative. We can rebuild this and do it the right way. But there is an extreme version of an alternative that's pretty dark. And the 30s really are very instructive, to Elizabeth's point. There were actively people who were focused on autocracy and a form of plutocratic oligarchy at the time. There was an attempt at a group of crazy capitalists who were thinking of creating a coup in the United States that was avoided. There were the alternatives in Europe were available and in some ways pursued here. But we chose a different path, and we can choose it again. And capitalism can be the greatest source of wealth and opportunity, or it can be used as a tool to restrict it.
Damon, the thing I take most from your story is that we need rules, right? That we are lucky sometimes to get folks who recognize in an enlightened way that what's good for workers is good for business, but not everybody will. And we cannot rely on the goodwill of good people to get that right. We need a set of rules and economic incentives to make sure that democracy is in the driver's seat and that capitalism is a system of economics that actually delivers the public goods that we want. And we need to make sure that that is a intellectual consensus that is enduring.
Capitalism stays in the passenger seat.
So I promised fealty to the clock, and the clock has run down. So we're going to I think this has been a tremendous conversation, but I want to close where I began, which is, if you listen to my fellow panelists, you get a very clear vision of how capitalism and democracy can and should work together, both to produce a stable and positive society, the sort of society you'd want to live in, and also to create wealth, right? To do all these things. This can be done. But I want to close where I began, which is that it cannot be done without political and economic power behind that vision. Good ideas are essential, but they are not enough. There has to be power. And we're not going to talk about that subject because the clock is out, but I urge you to look into, where did the political and economic power come from to build the New Deal order? Why was it that the Ford Motor Company had to, at the end of the day, actually treat its workers humanely and sit down at the bargaining table with them? What did those workers have to do to make that happen? Look into that yourself. And I would urge you to do it on YouTube, where you can see the videos of how it happened in grainy black and white. It is instructive. And on that basis, we will honor the clock and close.
I told y'all Henry Ford was an asshole, right? So power. People have power. LEAH Greenberg knows how much power people have. LEAH Greenberg, one of the co-founders of Indivisible, and boy, did they host some protests this weekend! Way to go. I mean, LEAH, you got us all jazzed up for this program tonight. Come on up and tell us about it.
Is this good? Folks in here? Okay, great. All right, I'm going to hug the mic. Okay, so just to quickly introduce myself, I'm LEAH Greenberg. I got my start about a decade and a half ago as a former congressional staffer, which was an early part of my career up until Donald Trump won election the first time in 2016. My husband and I wrote a guide to congressional advocacy and organizing locally to replicate functionally the model of the Tea Party without the bigotry and the violence. It went viral. It prompted the formation of thousands of local Indivisible groups all over the country, and we have been organizing in partnership with these locally led volunteer organizations ever since. And I think what I would pull out here as I think about the application in this moment is, part of the reason that we wrote the guide was we understood that Congress is a black box to regular people, right? It is not a black box to wealthy people and to corporations. They know how to navigate the system to get the outcomes that they want. And what we wanted to do in our initial work, and what we've tried to continue to do in the work that we've done over the last 8 years, is really make those systems and those ways of operating accessible, to demystify power so that regular people can organize to apply their collective leverage to shape outcomes in our direction. Now, obviously, we are in a pretty difficult or a pretty dark time right now, and we are thinking about. But the good news that I can share is that people are responding. People are rising up. What we have seen in the last 5 months since Donald Trump was elected is a steady escalation in the number of people who are looking around and saying, what can I do? How do I get involved? I'm ready to lead. We've had, we estimate that within the next couple of months, we're going to be at twice as many groups locally around the country as we were as of November 2024. These are, again, regular people. They are nurses, they are teachers, they are IT technicians who are realizing that they've got to do something, who are coming together, forming communities in their local areas, and who are applying their leverage to their members of Congress, to their elected officials, wherever they can to push back and make a difference. Now, we focus on holding our reps accountable. We focus, our strategy right now is really around how do we fracture the mega billionaire coalition and how do we build ours. In the immediate period, a lot of that focus is around how do we apply pressure to the most immediately responsive leg of the stool, which is members of Congress. There is a very slim congressional majority. You may be aware because you see headlines about all the chaos on a regular basis. The Republicans hold there are a lot of people who we know behind the scenes are incredibly nervous and concerned about what has been happening over the last several months, and the political impacts that it is having on them. And we know that because they have ceased showing up in public to talk to their constituents over the last couple of months. From our folks who have gone to town halls to our folks who have started having town halls because members of Congress are no longer speaking to their own constituents. What we have seen is that Republicans are showing us every day that they don't have a mandate for what they are trying to do. They don't have a mandate for slashing government services. They don't have a mandate for firing federal workers. They don't have a mandate for the cuts to Medicaid and Medicaid and SNAP that they are going to try to push through in order to fund a massive giveaway to the wealthy in short order. And we know that because they don't want to talk to anybody about it. And so in the absence of their absence, we are stepping up to educate regular people all over the country about what is at stake and what is happening. And then our second piece is we talk about building a coalition. We got to build a big tent. We want to pull in people who maybe weren't with us in the past. We've got to extend a hand to people who didn't feel like it was worth their time to vote, or people who were frustrated with the status quo and who went with the other guy because they wanted a change. As people understand, as we bring home the real consequences and the real realities of this administration, of its, the alliance between oligarchs and extremists that is taking place and that is shaping our lives every day, we got to pull those folks in. And so that was really a core part of the thinking behind the hands-off protests over this weekend, which I want to be really clear was a massive cross-ecosystem partnership with a lot of our partners, with Move On, with Public Citizen, with Working Families Party, with our friends across the labor movement, across reproductive freedom, environmental. I can't name everybody. I will forget somebody, but I just want to be clear that it was really an entire cross-ecosystem moment, because we all recognize that whatever brings us to this work right now, whether we are concerned about our Medicare or Social Security, whether we are concerned about our trans friends and family members, whether we are concerned about our civil rights, we all have a stake in pushing back. And so we built the campaign and that focus around how do we collectively come together and demonstrate the breadth and the depth of the opposition all over the country. And with 1,300 protests, which is a historic number, what we've seen is that there is there is indeed a deep and broad opposition that is rising up everywhere. And I'll just conclude by saying that we're in this moment of institutional and elite collapse, right? Businesses are throwing in, higher education, law firms, actors across the ecosystem are moving to try to accommodate or enable or get their best that they can out of this administration. And that is the moment when it calls for regular people to show the courage that is necessary to buck those folks up. We need a broad coalition. We need acts of community. We need acts of courage. That is how we are going to get through this together. That is how we are going to create the conditions that will allow for change in the future. Thank you.
Kleptocracy, our next vocabulary word. Kleptocracy, a government by those who seek chiefly status and personal gain at the expense of the governed. Donald Jr. and Eric, I'm looking at you. All right, let's have gradually then suddenly from garden variety corruption to kleptocracy. Jesse EISINGER, author of The Chicken Shit Club. Did you come up with that, Jesse? Come on up. Or your publisher. That's a good one. Donald Sherman, Chief Counsel of CREW, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, and Michael Waldman, President and CEO of the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU. Thanks, y'all.
Hi, thank you, Erica, and I'm very pleased to be here. I'm a senior editor and reporter at ProPublica, and I've been really kind of focused, especially in this administration, on the issue of corruption, which I think is in this kind of DDoS attack on our psyches, the kind of Bannonite flood the zone with shit, it's actually an issue that's slightly receded. not in importance, but in kind of the way we've paid attention to it, because it is so pervasive and so brazen, but also there's a lot of other things going on. So I think what we're going to do today for our time is kind of try to weave in a little bit of corruption, how we got here, and the attack on the rule of law, which of course is a related but slightly separate phenomenon. So when I mean corruption now, what we're talking about from Donald Trump personally profiting from the office of the presidency is something that we have not seen at all, at least in modern history. And I think it's actually unprecedented in American history. The fact that he has a publicly traded company. He oversees the regulator of publicly traded companies, and he has crypto interests, and they have withdrawn crypto regulation, and then you've got these cabinet officials like Howard Lutnick and advisors like Stephen Witkoff, who would sort of Spiro Agnew would be fired for a lack of ambition in this administration, so it is dazzling and brazen and completely out in the open in a way that really confounds investigative journalists like me and my team, because the conflicts of interest are so obvious and in fact utterly sort of justified and explicit it really makes our job impossible, because we like to dig up secrets. There are no secrets here. So how did we get here? Well, the Hemingway line is famous cliche is gradually and then suddenly. So how did we get to this extraordinary moment of corruption? And it really begins with an erosion of the rule of law. And what I've come to realize is my beat and my reporter's beat is a beat about elite impunity. So how did we get to a point of such extraordinary elite impunity? Well, it sort of happens, really accelerates after the NASDAQ crash of 2000, which, of course, if anybody's watching the markets today, they're having some PTSD. And in the wake of that, what was revealed was a pandemic of accounting fraud at corporations, and there was a series of prosecutions. And then I'm going to give, now today we've had a history lesson from Damon, we've had a history lesson from Erica. I'm going to give you my journalistic popular history, and it's going to be thumbnail sketch. But so we had a backlash to these prosecutions. We'd put Bernie Ebbers in prison from WorldCom. We'd prosecuted Ken Lay and Jeff Skilling from Enron, et cetera. And there was a huge backlash to this. And it was embraced not just by Republicans, but by Democrats as well. And they decided, well, we can't really focus on prosecuting individual white-collar criminals. It doesn't really do much good. And what we really should do is try to root out systemic problems by focusing on settling with corporations for money, punishing those corporations, and ultimately what that means is having them pay money and making their legal problems go away. At the same time, the courts turned against white-collar criminals. And the Supreme Court loves many things, but nothing so much as their love of a white-collar criminal. And in fact, the Supreme Court really has decided over a series gradually of a variety of rulings that really there isn't much to this idea of corruption, that corruption doesn't really exist. There's been an idea that governors who take gifts aren't actually taking bribes unless that's an official act. Recently, they said a bribe that's given after the fact isn't a bribe, because who can know what the connection might be to that. And that's just sort of one. They've sort of rolled back the SEC's ability to regulate and function. So you've had this kind of shift from prosecutors about the idea of how to prosecute white-collar crime, and you had a shift in the courts, which were much more hostile. And they were working together, and prosecutors got scared of trying to punish individuals. One of the seminal rulings was they rolled back the Jeff Skilling prosecution from Enron because and prosecutors had used a honest services law and a new and kind of original interpretation of the law to expand to corporate crime, and the Supreme Court slapped them down. So you had these two sort of parallel track kind of developments, and then you get the financial crisis, and we don't actually prosecute any top bankers for any crimes committed in the financial crisis. And so what does an average person know from the financial crisis if you walked into a bar in 2011, 2012? Well, they'd say that we bailed out the banks, and that's sort of complicated, but we did bail out the banks, and no one went to prison. And it made people extraordinarily angry, and it justifiably extraordinarily angry, because it was a catastrophic crisis for the institutions of American society, and no one was held accountable. And so then you get the rise of Donald Trump and the crisis of now. People make fun of me for having the. I'm obsessed in my. I have this one solution that explains everything in society, but I think that Donald Trump is a direct result of our elite impunity failure and our failure to prosecute white-collar crime, because this is a guy who engaged in tax cheating. It turns out that it wasn't just that we didn't prosecute bankers in the wake of the financial crisis. The problem persisted before this, it existed before this and persisted after it, and covered whole swaths of the economy, not just investment banks, but tax enforcement and campaign finance and commercial real estate, and people who are acting in commercial real estate and committing frauds and committing tax abuses, and then later committing campaign finance abuses. Does this ring any bells to anybody? Were not prosecuted. And so people were extraordinarily angry about the lack of accountability. They wanted to blow things up, and then they elected a guy who actually was someone who, if we had had adequate white-collar prosecutions in this country, there could not be the phrase President Donald Trump. And so today we've got Elon Musk smashing and grabbing through Starlink and Tesla, running amok. We've got Howard Lutnick. We've got Trump. And so you look at tariffs now, and the tariff policy is an extraordinary attack on the institutions of the global economy, but it's also a nexus for incredible potential corruption, because every company will now come in, as they have been before this, and try to seek favors. Every industry will try to placate Trump and donate, in other words, in the expectation to try to get exceptions to the rules. And you've seen certain exceptions already, like oil and gas and Russia, and people will try to replicate that. So my fellow panelists have been focused slightly less on corruption and more on the attack on the rule of law in this administration. And I'm curious, Donald, how you bridge the gap, but are these related phenomena, and how do you see the attack on the rule of law, and how are you guys addressing it?
Sure. Thanks for the question. So for folks who are not familiar with CREW, we're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that has been fighting against corruption, for transparency, and for campaign finance for sure. Better? For more than 2 decades. And I think our mission and the resistance that we have received from members of Congress, from the courts, from the executive branch over that 2 decades is integral to the story of how we got here, right? I would agree with you that corruption is part of how what contributed to the rise of Donald Trump. I would offer that Trump can't run on draining the swamp if institutions like Congress, if presidents like from Reagan to Obama had not done more to hold themselves and each other to account. And it is because those leaders, those institutions were not maximalist, or at least more rigorous in anti-corruption, both in the government and the private sector, that we found ourselves where someone who has been elected to office who is maximalist for corruption, for themselves, for enriching himself and his closest political allies, including the person that he hired after donating $250 million to his campaign to run and essentially dismantle the government. So integral to the story of how we got here is that Congress did not do enough to police itself. Integral to how we got here is that the executive branch, when they had an opportunity to rein in the power of the presidency, said that norms will save us, courts will save us. And I think what we are experiencing right now is that none of those things are as reliable as the people that were in leadership told us that they were. And now it is incumbent upon us, as the public, as another institution of government, the most powerful institution in our democracy, to use our power to hold these folks to account. So what are we doing? We are every day working to ensure that there is transparency and accountability for this government. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge my friend Drew Pomerantz, who's in the audience here as a board member of Patriotic Millionaires. One of the reasons why Drew was co-counsel with Crew and others bringing the ballot challenge case against Donald Trump after the January 6th insurrection. We brought that case in Colorado with Drew's help and others. And one of the reasons why we had to bring that case is because Senate Republicans abdicated their responsibility when faced with the opportunity to hold Trump accountable for January 6th. The Biden Justice Department failed in their responsibility to hold the leader of the insurrection accountable, all the while prosecuting thousands of foot soldiers who are now been pardoned by the insurrectionist president in office. And so what we are doing right now is working with partners like at Brennan Center, folks across the country, to stand in the breach. We have filed 4 lawsuits in the past couple of months. One that you probably heard the most about is our FOIA suit against Doge, because Doge has been operating in maximal secrecy with no accountability, and we earned the first court decision to find that Doge was an agency under the Freedom of Information Act. So what does that mean? The FOIA is a very humble little tool that regular people use every day to find out what their government is doing on their behalf, particularly when Doge is moving as quickly as it is. What we have seen after our victory in court is a few things. More requests are coming, more FOIA lawsuits, more requests are coming to Doge for information. We are on the precipice of getting discovery from Doge. So Congress can't get answers from Doge. The public can't get answers from Doge. But our humble FOIA case may be the first time that we get these executives under oath to tell us what they are doing, how they are situated, and under what legal authority they are doing it. We are also, and I thought this was really great, but this struggle for democracy will not be won in Washington. And I thought it was great that Patriotic Millionaires are going across the country. I spent about a month of my life in Colorado a couple years ago. I'm on the road quite a lot. We have to go where people live. We have to explain why corruption matters to the things that they care most about. Donald Trump, in the prior term, used tariffs and accepted countries that were funneling money to him from tariffs. The public needs to understand that the pain that they are feeling at the grocery store when they go shopping is not being shared equally. And one of the reasons why it's not is because Donald Trump, as is his in his character, continues to favor himself and protect himself and his closest allies from any accountability. So we are not just going into court, but we are going across the country. We are working in partnership with Brennan and others to defend our democracy. And I will just end by saying, again, we have seen that this Congress is willing to abdicate its responsibility. We have seen that the Supreme Court has abdicated its role in our government as a check on the executive. Yes, there have been some victories in courts, including ours, but the courts will not save us. It is up to us. And I am glad to be in here with other folks who have been willing to answer that call, because it's up to us up here. It is up to y'all in the room. It's up to the people watching. It's up to the people that Indivisible is organized across the country. We have to defend our democracy because our democracy belongs to us.
Well, Michael, I want to ask, and we are, as journalists, really rooting for that FOIA lawsuit. But unfortunately, they've closed FOIA offices wholesale by firing people, and so even
we sued about that on Friday.
Okay. So, Michael, to Donald's last point there, that the courts can't save us. I mean, CREW is an organization, and you are an organization, both with a kind of embedded belief in the rule of law and a notion that we need to adjudicate these questions through the courts. The courts now are going through their own deep ethical institutional crisis, some of which I think we've at ProPublica helped usher along with our stories
Amen.
about billionaire gifts to justices. So how do you square that and think about the corruption of the rule of law in that context?
Thank you. I at the founding of the country, Thomas Paine said, "In America, the law is king." It is a deeply embedded ideal that we have as a country. Having quoted Thomas Paine, I want to quote Erica, who worked with us at the Brennan Center as we were envisioning our own role, and who said, if you want to solve the problems, you have to fix the systems. And I want to talk about the deep interconnectedness between democracy reform and the kind of economic policies that we all want and that you are fighting for. To me, the most noteworthy thing in this last election is not that there was an anti-incumbent wave here, which we saw all over the world after COVID, after inflation, but this was the first time since the 1800s that the incumbent party lost the White House 3 times in a row. There is, in other words, a deep disquiet in the country over how people are feeling about themselves, their connection to the government, their place in the economy, in the world. Trump, in his way, intuited it, and the Democrats kept missing it over and over and over. And Trump has put forward multiple incoherent arguments for the tariffs, as have all of his functionaries. Each time they went on television this weekend, the futures dropped another point or two. It was kind of like the run-up to the Iraq invasion, where they couldn't come up with one actual rationale. But Trump seems deeply to feel that he wants to replace the income tax with a system based on tariffs. And he said for some reason, nobody can figure out why, they moved from tariffs to the income tax in the teens. Well, you all know that thinking about what Damon said about what it made it possible for the New Deal to happen as a political matter. What made the New Deal possible as a political matter were the reforms that were enacted first in the progressive era a few years before. The income tax, the 13th Amendment, was a direct consequence of the sense of corruption and inequality that came from the tariff-based system for funding the government back then. The direct election of U.S. senators, the 17th Amendment, and the vote for women were part of the democracy reform, all of which were necessary even before unions were empowered and others to get the political ability to do something like the New Deal. I would argue we're in a similar situation today where if we ignore the system reform element of what is needed, we will find ourselves running up against the timidity and cowardice of people in power, which we've seen over and over and over again. I'll mention three quick things. One is, first, I don't believe the courts will save us. I wrote a book called The Supermajority about the Supreme Court and how it was a corrupted and captured institution. I think the rulings that have been made thus far in the trial courts have been tremendous. What we need to focus on now as much as possible are the appellate level, where the Federalist Society and the judges and justices that they backed will have far greater sway. We have something at the Brennan Center that we're calling the Constitutional Crisis Litigation Project. It's working with others on dozens of amicus briefs in these big constitutional cases. So many of them revolve around the issue of what the power of the president is. So much of what this administration is claiming in all these illegal actions from the first minute of the first day is to accumulate unprecedented and untrammeled power in the executive. The Tariffs, as a conservative public interest legal organization, noted a lawsuit a few days ago. May I switch mics with you? Thank you. Hello. Does Donald Trump have the power to do these tariffs? There's a strong argument, no, he doesn't. He's claiming emergency powers in order to do it. And there's a decent chance that the conservative legal movement is going away and saying something like that too. So there are a lot of important cases coming. We need voices from the business community to sign and be part of the amicus strategy on this, because there is a chance, if there's any validity at all to the claim by the right-wing justices, for example, that major questions have to be decided by Congress. Certainly the things that Trump is trying to do are those kinds of major questions. That's one of the guardrails that we want to do everything we can. While we are fully aware of what this court has been, we need to try to call it to its highest self. The second is the voters. We have the election next year. The second major strategy from this administration has now been launched, which is an attack on the right to vote. 2 weeks ago, an executive order from Donald Trump purported to take control of the election system in the United States, purported to order an independent agency to require that everyone must produce a passport, not even a birth certificate or a driver's license, a passport to register to vote in the United States, ordered the states to give DOJ full access to the voter rolls or lose federal money. It's illegal. We have sued, so have a number of others. I think we have a very strong chance of blocking. So many of these executive orders are really, they lack the force of law. They're basically malevolent press releases. And it takes the courts to stand up to them. But another, even more dangerous thing is happening this week in Congress. This week, in all likelihood, the House of Representatives will vote on the SAVE Act. That is a voter suppression law. It would require citizens to produce a passport or a birth certificate, basically, to register and vote. It would upend the voter registration laws of every state. It's probably going to pass the House. We have a strong chance to beat it in the Senate, and it's important that everybody raise their voice. But this is the beginning of an attack on voter registration groups, on election officials, and on the right to vote that we know is an important strategy. Last point I'll make is this. We need to demand that political leaders be as ambitious as has been described around these democracy reforms. The Freedom to Vote Act which came achingly close to passing in the last Congress, contained strong campaign finance reform components, but not strong enough. And I think it's really important that progressives not be self-congratulatory on this measure. Bill Clinton's taken a lot of kicking today, and I don't actually think a lot of it is fair. It was one of his top aides. He pushed for a strong public financing system for the Congress of the United States. And it was killed by the progressive Democrats who didn't want to give up their own financial advantage that they had, not realizing the way that would set their own views at a generational disadvantage. It's the progressives, when given a chance, who back off far more often, and we need to hold them to account to their own rhetoric, or we're going to find ourselves having the same conversation in the same ballrooms decade after decade.
All right. I think we could go on for several more hours. I wanted to follow up with the clash that's coming as the executive ignores the courts. But for now, I think we'll have to leave it with where we are, with an extraordinarily corrupt administration and a disaster in the courts. And on that happy note, back to you.
Excellent. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, y'all. That was wonderful. Michael always gives me hope. When I worked with Michael at the Brennan Center, he taught me about the concept of punctuated equilibrium, where nothing happens and then all of a sudden everything's possible. So we could be in a moment of punctuated equilibrium. Let's push that. I'm going to call Nabeen Ahmed from Oxfam, Nancy McLean, author of Democracy in Chains, A Deep History of the Radical Right's Stealth Plan for America, and Ruth Ben-Ghiat, author of Strongmen Mussolini to the Present. And we'll do our next vocabulary word, oligarchy, a government in which a small group exercises control for especially corrupt and selfish purposes. I think we have someone in the audience who is going to use this word in a sentence. Jacob.
Yes, thank you, Erica. My cabinet from IKEA is stronger than President Trump's. Another sign we are an oligarchy.
Excellent. All right, panel, take it away.
Thank you so much, Erica. What a tremendous honor and privilege it is to be in conversation with you all today. I'm Nabeel Ahmed. I'm Economic Justice Director at Oxfam. I'm just going to have to start quickly by thanking the amazing Patriotic Millionaires family for the incredible and groundbreaking work that it does here in the United States and internationally, which I see around the world. It's my pleasure to be in conversation with our two fellow co-panelists here, Ruth Ben-Ghiat. I think two people who need really no introduction: historian, commentator, author, New York Times bestseller of Strong Men, and Nancy McLean, historian, scholar of 20th century American history, and also New York Times bestselling author of Democracy in Chains. I think two people whose work and leadership also helps unveil the blueprints that are playing out in this very moment. And what of that moment? A moment in which the 0.0001% today control a greater share of wealth in the United States than they did during that era of the Gilded Age, of the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and so forth. That's looking back. Looking forward, you know, we calculated about a year ago where things are going, and we estimated, here's a new word for you, Erica, trillionaires. We estimated that at current rates, we would see the world's first trillionaire within a decade from now, a word that probably shouldn't exist. We actually had to redo those estimates recently, and now, folks, we are on track for an estimated 5 trillionaires within a decade from now. A trillion is a hell of a lot of money, but that's a hell of a lot of power as well. I want to situate the conversation we're about to have in 3 things, in 3 words. First is global. American oligarchs also are global oligarchs who extract from countries, from people across the world. It's an essential part of this conversation, but also who exchange with oligarchy as it exists across the world. Global. Second, ideology. You know, I don't think we're having as much a policy conversation today, but one about ideas, about power, about money that leverages those ideas that are often so hidden from plain sight. And the third word is history. We're not having a conversation about something that started, 3 months ago, 6 months ago, in 2016, but we're talking about a long arc of history that goes back many decades. Global, ideology, history. Ruth, if I can begin by turning to you. Could you walk us through a little bit, what does international history tell us about this relationship between authoritarianism and oligarchy? And let me put it simply, who's in charge here? The guys with huge amounts of money, or the guys holding high political office? Over to you.
Well, thank you. Can you hear me? This is my first time here, and I just want to say thank you to all of you for what you're doing, because a time like this in history of our country, it's about having impact and having the means to have impact. So thank you. Well, very often the people with the money and the people in power, they overlap. And that's by design. And remember Trump 1.0, Mnuchin, Wilbur Ross, who forgot during his confirmation hearing that he was in business with Putin's son-in-law, all those people. But because the purpose of authoritarianism, they have a very different concept of governance. They don't care about public welfare. This is all, hitting very hard now. They don't care about public welfare. They really don't care about accountability, about conflicts of interest. The true authoritarian, somebody like Trump, their entitlement and their arrogance is so extreme. They don't believe that others have any right to call conflicts of interest. They just don't believe in that whole notion. So that's about ideas. So it's not about good governance. It's about amassing power, keeping yourself safe. They need to feel safe. They need to reorganize governance around being able to commit corruption and enrich themselves from office. Those are the principles. So, about the oligarch question, we're innovating the authoritarian playbook right now, because the classic oligarch, if you think about Russia, every time we say Russia, we need to say kleptocracy. That's very, very important, but it's not done, and people still don't understand kleptocracy. Because the point of the oligarch system is that you have one guy in the power vertical, as they call it in Russia, and that's Putin. And then you have these people who are outside the government who buy up or control hostile takeovers different ways, important, energy, media, and so they become the kind of system. It's called authoritarian bargains of elites and the executive, and they prop each other up. They have their bargain. So, let's see, and so you have this also in Hungary, in India, where you had with the media. This is how they domesticated the media. They got these oligarchs to buy up media properties. So fine. Now what we're doing is different, because here's some private individual who had everything in the whole world he wanted. He's the richest man in the world, so he's the uber oligarch. He owns Twitter, so he radicalized, the machine for radicalizing people. Fine. What he didn't have was access to a sovereign government. Mm-hmm. And so I believe that Doge was created as a mechanism for him to infiltrate. And so from within, he's been re-engineering government to get rid of investigations into his companies, to profit better. And so my book, Strongmen, there's only one guy on the cover, because that's the strongman thing. We have two guys. We have a power-sharing arrangement. And so this is an innovation, and we have to think outside the box to know what to do with it.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Right, from authoritarian bargain to re-engineering government. Nancy, if I can turn to you. As a US historian, how do you explain the deep history, but also the ideology that have brought us to this point right now?
Thank you, Nabil, and thank you all for being here and having us with you. It's great to be back with Patriotic Millionaires. Such an admirer of your work. It's so important. So what I want to do to answer that question is kind of take an X-ray long view of how we got to this moment, because the carnival of cruelty that has been in play since 47's re-election has a very deep history. It's sometimes said that a tripod is the most stable structure, and that has certainly been the case for our enduring reactionary partnership in America. Its 3 member groups, a kind of Venn diagram with obvious overlap, have been first, predatory capitalist, second, white supremacists, and third, religious conservatives led by conservative Protestants oblivious to the ethics of Jesus. They're combined. These folks never encounter the parable of the Good Samaritan, or if they did, they thought it's, oh, love the neighbor who's most like me. Anyway, so the combined power of these 3 groups has waxed and waned for over 2 centuries. I really feel like we need to dig deep to see how we got to this moment. It surged in the run-up to the Civil War as militant enslavers, America's first predatory capitalists, and a global group at that, aimed to hold power at any cost, including treason, that brought on the most violent civil war in the Western Hemisphere. That power was subdued for a time by Reconstruction, then rose again after the members of this troika violently defeated America's first taste of multiracial democracy. During the Great Depression, as we heard earlier, that coalition's partners were routed by militant mass working class movements and new federal policy, only to resurge with the Red Scare after World War II, then be beaten back by the Civil Rights Movement and allied causes in the 1960s and 70s, despite what the Tripod's members proudly called massive resistance to Brown versus Board of Education and beyond. Out of that massive resistance came much more intentional coalition building, as Erica mentioned, over the last 50 years, building toward today's bloody-minded determination and a unified power among these partners not seen since the 1850s. Why so venomous and hell-bent on revolutionizing America now, no matter the toll? This is crucial to understand because all 3 coalition partners are desperate. They see this as their last chance to impose their grossly unpopular agenda. If you read their stuff, that's what they say. They know they won't get another chance once people get it, hence the reckless frenzy to act fast. And here I just want to say a little bit about each and how they reached this moment. Since in 1990s, predatory capitalists, above all, and it is crucial that we understand this, from the fossil fuel sector, led by Charles Koch, as I described in Freedom Is Not Enough, they have seen their trillions in investments and expected future profits imperiled by social movements and international government action, just like the enslavers before them. So they have deliberately cultivated partners with much bigger followings. White supremacists who had never accepted civil rights victories then panicked at the election of Barack Obama in 2008 because they rightly saw the imminent end of white numerical and cultural dominance in a multiracial democracy. And the religious right leaders had lost the ability to impose their dogma on their own straying children who can't take it anymore and have fled the pews in droves, let alone all women and government policy. So they have radicalized into Christian nationalists, especially since the pandemic, and many of them played driving roles in the attack on our country on January 6th, 2021.
Wow, Nancy. I can't wait for all of this conversation to go viral. Let's turn to how that carnival of cruelty, you've gone, I was thinking about 50 years, you've gone back 300 years. But you know, we're seeing it play out right now. Yeah. We're seeing it in even the, going back to you, Ruth, this re-engineering of government that we're seeing. You know, chopping or even chainsawing down government. This is not just a mild government reform. There's a chainsaws are out very clearly. How original are these ideas, and what are they actually trying to do?
So if we look at frames for understanding this, one of them I like to use is fake populism. For example, the original Mr. Chainsaw in Milei in Argentina, you know, he's the man of the people. Now, Argentina did have high inflation, fine. But what was his job? He was the advisor to like the richest billionaire in Argentina. And so these people claim to be draining the swamp on behalf of the people, and instead it's something very different. I do want to say it's important that the speed and scale of what is going on in this country doesn't have a parallel even in the early months of the autocrats we know and do not love today. Even Putin or Erdogan or whoever you want to name, who came via elections. They took several years to do the kind of, to start setting up the oligarch system and privatizations. Mussolini, there's a whole history of right-wing, it's not just Pinochet, nobody knows about Mussolini, who became a prime minister of a democracy by appointment in 22. And in 23, in order to get the elites on his side, because he'd been a socialist, they were a little, hesitant about him, he did massive privatizations, including the insurance sector. But what is going on now with the scale of destruction, it's not just repurposing, it's not just purges. So I'm always trying to figure out what is new and what is the authoritarian playbook. So purging institutions, hollowing them out, going after people, this is not original, but the speed, eradicating entire agencies, taking a wrecking ball, and also the level of, I'm calling it really sabotage. I think we have to speak plainly and bluntly about what is going on. This is somebody in partnership with Putin, and he said, I have it, if you want to look at the source for this, it's, I start with it in my New York Times op-ed from January 30th. Trump told us on the campaign trail, he said, if you have a smart president, they won't be enemies. You'll make them do great. And he was referring to China, Russia, and North Korea. He wants to realign America away from, wreck it as a democracy in all areas, public health, economy, everything across the board, education, just wreck it, and realign it as a partner of autocracies. And Anne Applebaum has a good, and that's also with Bukele and his gulag. There's a whole other history going on. If I just may say something else, there are lots of stories in authoritarian history about terrible economic outcomes due to something called autocratic backfire. When a leader, usually they've been in power a long time, and they surround themselves, they have what's called the inner sanctum. They surround themselves with sycophants, family members, like incompetence. There's engineered incompetence, like with Hegseth. And so they don't get objective intake. You're all leaders. You know how important it is to have objective intake and proper intelligence. So they don't get that. And they also start to believe their own fantasies. They get into a situation of psychological grandiosity. And they're very, very dangerous. The more we capitulate to them, the more they feel empowered. And this is when they do stupid things. I'll just mention one. Well, there was, Erdogan with Erdoganomics, like that led to, so there's that, that's recent. Idi Amin, you may think, what does he have to do with anything? He decided that he was going to kick out, deport the entire population of South Asians from Uganda. They were the source of all the commerce, all the small business, so the economy totally tanked, and he had to turn around and invite them back. And they're just, or think about Putin's kleptocracy, where you just plunder the state, you wreck the institutions. Look at the military. That's why they have North Korea there. Totally ravaged. This is also autocratic backfire. But we are going through this at a crazy, accelerated pace, where in a matter of months, all of these pathologies of authoritarian rule, as I call them, and the leader in his bubble, I'm going to do tariffs. I've always thought tariffs were good. And nobody has the courage to stand up and tell him in his inner circle or the elites in the country, no one will do it. And that's when you get absolute ruin.
Thank you so much, Ruth. I so appreciate the way that we can traverse across history and of examples across the world. We went into their kind of psychological grandiosity, and let's turn there. Nancy, they must have some vulnerabilities, this oligarchy. What do they fear most?
Well, they fear most the vast majority of the people, not only in this country, but around the world, because they understand that their agenda is terribly unpopular, as I just tried to explain. So again, I think it's really important to center ourselves with the recognition, and trust me, I read their stuff so you don't have to. They talk about their desperation, and they show it, and they're showing it now in the vengeful rage of this counter-revolution as they depict it and understand it. They think we've made a revolution, they're doing counter-revolution. So these big billionaire donors on the right, Charles Koch, Leonard Leo, Bradley, Scaife, etc., they have invested fortunes to keep this coalition's partners marching in line together. So those investments culminated in their joint production of Project 2025, which the Trump administration is now imposing at breakneck speed after his lies that he wouldn't. And also, as we've talked about, the early investors have now been bolstered by the billionaire Broligarchy of Silicon Valley, and above all, and this is really important to remember their origins, the South African apartheid spawn, Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, who have never shed the ideology that their families moved to South Africa to support. So these combined forces are taking aim at every progressive achievement over a century now, and I described the playbook for this in Democracy in Chains, but also every public good, from education to the Postal Service, Social Security and Medicare, to national parks and libraries. And what we need to understand, and urgently, is where all this ends if they have their way. And I will say it plainly. It ends in economic eugenics. Economic eugenics. Using their power over government to, as Musk says of the federal workforce, cull the population. Each partner in this Hydra-headed coalition believes that they have a right to dominate and to trample those they consider less valuable, expendable people. People whose voices should be silenced in school, at work, and in politics. The predatory billionaires talk endlessly about IQ and genes and sneer at the low wealth people who they refer to, and Elon Musk has said it publicly, as parasites. The white supremacists, I think we know well at this point, and the Christian nationalists share a Calvinist conviction that God favors the wealthy and that it is a sin to help the damned. So all three partners are also committed to keep drilling for oil and gas until the climate collapses. And this is a unifying thread among all the strong men that are in operation today, and it's not an accident, as I'll get to in 1 second. Some European thinkers have used the term fossil fascism for what we're facing, and I believe that's apt because it's also global, with transnational allies everywhere enlisting and aggravating racism, nativism, gender anxiety, and homophobia in order to achieve an authoritarian oligarchy that they cannot win by persuasion. And could I get the next slide up, the map? Our predatory capitalists in the US have combined with others in the Anglophone world since 1981 to create a global movement of this cause. It is called the Atlas Network. I know I don't have time to go into it, but it is huge. It has over 500 partners now in over 100 countries, driven by these kind of dirty industry donors, making marriages with the homophobes and the anti-feminist groups like Alliance Defending Freedom, pushing immigration rights, fighting against indigenous rights in Australia and New Zealand. I could go on, but they are very determined, very much carrying the kind of ideology that I've talked about here. And I think if we know this, they are actually tremendously vulnerable. Because again, remember, this is a minority. They know the majority doesn't want their world. That is why they must leverage every prejudice that they can pour gasoline on kindling of whatever it is in the particular society they operate. So we need to fight this new fascism like the world depends on us, because in fact it does.
Amazing. Amazing. This is meant to be the trailer for reading these amazing books as well, and you've made me reflect there as well, Nancy. You know, oligarchs can't do this without weapons, and their weapons of choice, it strikes me, the weapon of choice of oligarchy is sexism, it's racism, it's white supremacy, and these are necessary tools for them to push their agenda. Thank you for that and for showing us a way forward. Ruth, if I could give the final word to you, you know, what does history teach us about how to fight back? What do people need to do?
Is that all? I think that we have a unique opportunity now because of the extreme and rapid nature of what is going on. Because, you know, we know that often when people are asked to mobilize for, quote, democracy, it's too abstract, it's too vague. You need, you know, there's lots of messaging about that, right? You know that. So, but now, people, Social Security, people can't get a hold of, there's vast anxiety. So it's going to hit people, farmers, all that, right? Their stock market, you know, holdings, all that. So we have a great opportunity to do civic education in defense of a different kind of politics and different, like Elizabeth said, you know, we have a chance to have a different set of ideas that can take hold and inform our reforms. And I believe, I don't want to be too utopian, but you know, there's many things, if we're going to reform our democracy, that we need to address that have been bipartisan evils, such as the US is one of the biggest money launderers in the world. Like, and that's been a bipartisan effort, shall we say? And until we address this kind of, until we lead with values, dignity, solidarity, equity, accountability, right? And we have a new politics and new economic policies, and that's where you come in. Based on this, we won't be safe and secure as a democracy, even if we get rid of the Trump-Musk power-sharing duo.
Thank you so much, Ruth. There's so much here, but in closing, it is a very bleak, terrifying time, and there's no real kind of, I don't want to present this as much as a silver lining, but as a reminder that even as fascism spread through Europe, for example, we saw FDR stand up and proclaim, as fascism was rising, on the need for a world which proclaimed the four freedoms. We remember 1965. Civil rights, the March on Washington, that was not such a, you know, we look back on it now, but that was a difficult time for the world, and that was a time in which a vision was also presented. We can't, their dreams, the dreams of oligarchs, are very much our nightmares, and we need to fight back, to resist, to be resilient, but also to push back with a better vision. And if I can just borrow a phrase from somebody unlikely, Friedrich Hayek in 1948 spoke about the courage to be utopian. I think we need also, in our fight back, the courage to be utopian and a North Star in a world that meets people's rights. Thank you so much, Ruth. Thank you so much, Nancy. Thank you for this amazing family. Thank you.
I mean, just incredible, y'all. It was so good. Thank you, everybody. We've got another vocabulary word, Broligarch. That's oligarch plus adolescent insecurities plus testosterone plus ketamine. Wrap them all together. That's a Broligarch. Let's learn more about him. Dennis Kelleher, come on up here, CEO of Better Markets. His title is Meet the Bros, Crypto and Wall Street and Private Equity. Oh my. Dennis.
Hi, everybody. Thanks. Is this working? So Better Markets is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, DC-based organization that fights for the public interest in the economic, financial policy making across Washington, at the regulatory agencies, Congress, the White House, media. And that means we actually spend every day, all day, fighting the oligarchs and their armies of lawyers, lobbyists, and other allies, and there are lots of allies. So now, I think this goes, yeah. So the economy and the financial system affect every single American, and yet the economy doesn't work for the vast majority of Americans and hasn't for decades. And here's a snapshot of that. So in the end of 2016, there was a survey done by the Federal Reserve, did a study that showed 90% of the American people were poorer at the end of 2016 than they were in 2007. By 17, to 35%. Astonishing, right? Night Ancient History, this is from July of 2024. 39% of Americans worried they could not pay their bills. That was higher than at any time during the Great Recession after the crash of 2008. And of course, we know what that leads to. That leads not to a wealth gap, but a wealth gulf, where 10% own 67% of the wealth of the country, and the bottom 50% own 2.5% of the wealth of the country. Now, how can that be? It's because the economy is rigged against Main Street Americans, and that's because the financial system too often fails to fulfill its role to support the real productive economy. It's too often a wealth extraction mechanism for the few instead of a wealth creation system for the many. Now, after building the biggest middle class in the history of the world after World War II, how did we get here? Well, that's where the oligarchs come in. They, especially those in the financial industry, are using their economic power to buy bipartisan political power, which they actually use to protect and increase their economic power. This purchased political power rigs the economy, deregulates the financial industry, takes the cops off the financial beat, and ladles out no strings, no accountability bailouts when their self-enrichment schemes crash the economy, as happened in 2008 and in 2023. Now, as Elizabeth mentioned earlier, among others, here's a snapshot of decades of deregulation, with 4 more coming under Trump. It didn't start a couple of years ago. It started with Reagan. It's bipartisan. The red colors are deregulation, and the other colors are slight interruptions of the deregulation. You can see a lot of this stuff at our website at Better Markets. I'm not going to go through this because we'll be here for 4 days. Now, that's the deregulation. What did it get us? The green lines here show that it took 10 years for unemployment to return to the 2007 level after the 2008 crash. The bottom line, the little red dots, show that every year that Main Street suffered, Wall Street paid itself tens of billions of dollars in bonuses. Now, importantly, this is not a partisan issue. This shows that the oligarch-purchased financial crashes slam everybody on Main Street, from New York to Montana to Texas. Now, what's the result of that? Of course, it's the wealth gulf. Finance undermines and corrupts our economy and our democracy by hijacking the government to serve its own ends. Now, whether you want to call them oligarchs, billionaires, ultra-rich, or whatever, this is what the titans of Wall Street have been doing for decades. And the same is true for the PE, the private equity kingpins, and now the crypto billionaires are joining in, pumping hundreds of millions of dollars into last year's election to buy as many politicians as possible. And at the very same time, of course, ironically, Americans have a very negative view of crypto, so it goes to show what money buys. Now, the names change a little, but the MO is the same. The ultra-rich use their money to buy and corrupt the political process. Now, what does that do? That prevents politicians from offering real solutions, structural solutions, that will attack the power centers that rig the economy and enrich Wall Street at the expense of Main Street. Now, here's just a hint of how that happens. This is a New York Times story, not The Onion, how Wall Street is subtly shaping the Harris economic agenda. Well, this one. Can Wall Street help Harris win Pennsylvania? Any good ideas there? Well, guess what? Harris had a Wall Street-approved economic pitch. It fell flat. Who would have guessed that Wall Street, right? I mean, the oligarchs have spent a long time rigging the economy and the financial system to benefit and enrich themselves. They aren't going to unrig it. And those chasing their money, cashing their checks, and doing their bidding aren't going to help either. But there is another outcome possible, and Erica talked about this, Elizabeth talked about this, and it requires new ideas, it requires new laws, it requires political action, it requires lawsuits, as the Brennan Center talked about in Jesse, but it also requires fighting the economic and political power of the oligarchs now in the policy trenches, and that's what Better Markets is doing now and every day. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, vocabulary: plutocracy. Rule by the richest. Let's stand up and stretch. It's been a good day. We're learning lots of stuff, aren't we? All right, stand up and stretch. Good, woo! Let it out, those Broligarchs. We're not going to win. Jacob,
yes,
do you
Erica.
have plutocracy for me in a sentence?
I've got you right here. The squirrels established a plutocracy so elite that only those with offshore nut accounts and gold-plated acorns could run for branch manager.
Woo! All right. Let's come up here. We've got Brooke Harrington. Where did the Broligarchs start? With an offshore financial system. The enablers, how the offshore financial system supports the new colonialism. Brooke Harrington, author of Offshore, Stealth Wealth, and the New Colonialism and Capital Without Borders. Brooke, take it away.
Hi. Can I get my slides? There it is. Thank you for having me, and do I need to hello. Thank you for having me here, and thank you particularly to Ruth and Nancy for setting up so perfectly the themes I want to talk about today. I was a little worried that some of what I was going to say might seem off the wall to this audience, but the historians, as usual, came through. I want to start with a pop quiz. How did this happen? How did we get this rando holding forth in the Oval Office while his little boy picks his nose next to the Resolute desk? That's not something I had on my bingo card. I don't know about you. Or this, remember the inauguration? All those little circles are the various billionaires who were seated ahead of members of Congress. So our elected representatives were relegated to the back seat while the billionaires were put front and center. That's an unusual way to do an inauguration in American history. So I want to talk about how we got here. I think it's important to define what we're fighting in order to fight it effectively. And the corporate way to talk about what's happened here is as a hostile takeover. Remember anyone alive in the 80s? Remember the era of the glory days of hostile takeovers? Same kind of model. And it didn't come out of nowhere. Elon Musk didn't roll out of bed 5 years ago and say, hey, I want to buy a government. The people, Musk among them, who have really spearheaded this hostile takeover, have been practicing for 50-odd years on little countries that no one cared about enough to stop it. Countries in the offshore financial system. So I want to tell you how that happened, because it's a story not many people have been able to tell. The offshore financial system is shrouded in secrecy. It contains vast quantities of money, about 12% of global GDP in private wealth alone. That's not counting the corporate part. And it functions not for the benefit of the Broligarchs, but they don't run it themselves. The people who run it are an even more secretive and little-known group of expert professionals named wealth managers. And they don't take calls from nosy sociologists like me, nor from journalists or anyone else. They serve their clients and they're paid to keep their mouths shut. They're in the business of selling secrecy. So the only way to study them and what they do is to join them. And so I spent 2 years going to wealth manager training school after I'd already been a professor for about 8 years. Long story about how I got the funding and time to do that, but that was the only way I could get face to face with the people who are keeping the engines of global inequality humming. And I never actually practiced as a wealth manager, but the credential got me face to face with people who would not normally have spoken to me at all, ever. And it got me to their professional society meetings. Like, you here couldn't just sign up to go to a wealth management meeting where thousands of wealth managers get together and talk about how they rip off governments and creditors and divorcing spouses and heirs and so forth. But once you're one of them, you can go and you can hear them dish all their dirt and their war stories. And I spent the next 15 years chasing these people around the globe, talking to them about what they did and why they did it. And amazingly, they spoke to me. I have some theories about why they did that, but don't have time to go into them now. This is where I went. Oh. Huh. There's something wrong with the slides. Those quotes aren't supposed to appear. They're animated to appear one at a time. If that's what has happened to my slides, you won't be able to see any of my words in the subsequent slides. Yeah, that's going to be bad. Can anyone fix that? That's supposed to be a map, and the quotes. Uh-oh. All right.
Managing the stress.
All right, so this is a map of all the places I went because that's where the offshore system is. Any country in the world can be an offshore financial center for people who aren't its citizens. In fact, the US is the most important offshore financial center in the world for people who aren't US citizens. It's the most secretive. It's why Russian oligarchs who were sanctioned by the Biden administration after the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, why they were evading sanctions by buying real estate for cash in New York State and Florida, right under the noses of the administration. So the wealth managers I talked to, they understood perfectly well the kind of people they were dealing with. And they said, our clients are scary people. They regard nations and laws as playthings, like paper dolls to move around. Furthermore, they understand that their clients in some cases have more power than the governments of any nation. So, you know, they were saying this 15 years ago, a dozen years ago, and now look where we are. Oh God, okay, I'm gonna have to wing it. So, the thing about these Broligarchs, who are the subset of global oligarchs who are from the tech industry and to some extent from high finance and big pharma, is that they have an agenda that's very different from rich people of the past. Oligarchs of the past would have been largely happy simply to get richer and more powerful. Putin's oligarchs, for example, they've made a bargain with him in which he does the politics, they get to be rich, and occasionally they work as his errand boys. That's not what's happening here at all. What's happening here is that a subset of very rich people who share an ideology that is actively hostile to democracy, hostile to capitalism even. I like to point out the fact that Peter Thiel published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal about 11 years ago entitled "Competition is for Losers." They don't believe in anything that they claim to believe in, at least they've claimed to believe in for years. They don't believe in the things that made them prosperous, like capitalism and democracy, and they're seeking to upend it on a global level. Oh, there it is. Okay, so why should you care about the offshore financial system? It's the platform for this elite counter-revolution, as Nancy called it. That's where they get the money to do it. They can challenge the state's ability to constrain them, but they're not anarchists. They want states to protect their property rights and their contracts. Just, they don't want it to protect the rest of us. The broader social conflict here is that in the course of achieving their ideology, they're gonna rip out by the roots all of the institutions and public goods that have made this country function. Not just this country, but any country that attempts to constrain capitalism in any way, which is why they are on such a tirade against the European Union. It's one of the very last institutions, because it's multinational, that can put meaningful constraints on people like Musk. Do you remember a couple of months ago, right after the election, I think, J.D. Vance was threatening to pull the US out of NATO to punish the EU for trying to impose its own sovereign laws on their boy, Elon Musk. That's an unusual position for the US government to take in relation to a private individual doing business and violating the law of other countries. So there's my boy Peter's op-ed. He's using the offshore system now to violate or to get around regulations, like he's doing tests of a herpes vaccine without FDA approval. So he's doing things that are really dangerous and unethical. It's not just about money and taxes, it's about completely unfettered oligarchical power to do whatever, including like a sort of an update on the Tuskegee experiments. It's grotesque. And then you have these guys, Andreessen, and who's the guy on the far left? Reid Hoffman. Oh, you probably know all of them face to face and have done for some time. It's what they're doing isn't benign in terms of democracy and capitalism. It's extremely radical, in fact. They don't just want to overthrow democracies. They want to overthrow the concept of a state that can constrain them in any way. It's the war chest. Where they get the money to do this, as well as the ideas, comes from this offshore world. Offshore funded Brexit. It funded the 2016 Trump campaign. It funds almost every single EU populist movement that there is. Why? Because using offshore accounts allows oligarchs to circumvent national election rules. It's also the political laboratory of the Broligarchy. It's where they've been practicing these moves in which they simply take over nascent democracies. They buy themselves a president or prime minister. They co-opt the legislatures. They literally hand these people a laundry list or a honey-do list that says, these are the laws I want passed, now go do it. There's a guy in federal prison right now named J. Allen Stanford. Heard about him? He did this to the Caribbean island of Anguilla and Barbuda. He just rolled in, quickly became the island's second largest employer, told the legislature, look, I'll give you the money to buy a hospital. I know you need a new one. You don't have to tell anyone I gave you the money. But Godfather style, remember the moment in The Godfather where he says to the undertaker, I may ask you a favor one day? That's what Stanford did with the government of this little island nation. And lo and behold, they did it. They gave him everything he wanted, and their legislature just kind of rubber stamped Stanford's agenda. So the practice runs they've been executing offshore include, anyone here heard of Robert Mercer? Hedge fund manager. So he was a mild-mannered oligarch, kind of a plain vanilla dude, known only to, say, give money to the ballet occasionally. But then the IRS tried to constrain him. They handed him a big fat tax bill and he lost his little mind. And suddenly created what for him was chump change, a $60 million war chest in Bermuda, which he used to fund Cambridge Analytica and its attempts to influence both the Brexit vote and the 2016 presidential election in the US. That's a model that was expanded, and now the Mercers have so much power that they beat the Federal Elections Commission. They're able to violate US federal laws with impunity, not just the laws of post-colonial states offshore. Here's the money slide, so to speak. I think in order to fight back, we have to correctly name what it is we're fighting. And it's not just capitalism or even neo-feudalism, which are two analyses that you'll hear frequently. What this movement is, what the Broligarchs are doing, the closest analogy is actually colonialism, and I'll tell you why. When I talk about this in Europe, because I think people there are more familiar with the history of feudalism, and they say, well, at least under feudalism, feudal lords had some obligations to the serfs. If you wanted to starve your serfs or deprive them of the obligations that you owed them, you could be excommunicated or taken to court. Colonial power is unfettered. There's a wonderful series of books in contemporary history about what's called empire by private contract, where complete randos would show up on islands in, say, the South Pacific, declare themselves king, and then the gunboats of the British would show up and say, yeah, we think he's king too. In fact, my namesake, Sir James Brooke, pulled this on the Indonesian island of Labuan about 200 years ago. He worked for the British Empire, and then he decided to freelance. Showed up, said, hey, I'm the king of Labuan, deal with it. And they did, and not coincidentally, Labuan is now one of the Indonesian region's biggest offshore financial centers. The Broligarchs themselves use the language of colonization, and they're not kidding. It's not a figure of speech. That's literally what they're trying to do. They're doing it in Central America, crypto cities in El Salvador and Honduras. I'm so glad Nancy mentioned the South African and Namibian origins of several of the Broligarchs, because I think that's where they get their mother tongue of political ideology. They literally come from a post-colonial environment, or one of the last great colonial experiments, and they're trying to do it here. Okay, I'm out of time, so I'm just going to speed through the rest of this and tell us what we can do about it. Expropriation, extraction of public goods, that's what DOGE is doing. The anti-DEI stuff is part of this sort of colonial ideology that some people are innately born to rule others. We're getting the high-tech version of that when Elon Musk talks about high-T alpha males. That's what he means. The good news is we know how to fight back against colonial powers. We've already done it. We saw a little bit of this on Saturday, the 18th century Tea Party method. But there are also new methods. And one of the things I'm doing research on now, after 17 years of qualitative research, is to look at the offshore networks of the Broligarchs and show how to destroy them. I can talk about that over lunch if anyone is interested, but it's actually fairly simple and direct, and there's a good model for it. Also, you may have noticed some of these oligarchs are very thin-skinned. So as a sociologist, I am compelled to mention that we can still use norms and stigmatization to move these people, and I think we should use it a lot more. So I can't show you the evidence for this, but if you want to read more, I've got 2 books on it, and I'm happy to talk about it at breaks or lunch.
Thank you, Brooke. That was great. I read somewhere that venture capitalists always have people have trouble with their flipping around and stuff because it engenders sympathy in the audience and it makes them more open to your argument. So we're going to turn our attention now. So we've laid it out, all right? So how do you fix it? One of our speakers in a little while is a Dutch historian. His name is Rutger Bregman. We're going to hear from him. But just kick off this next part of this, there was a great moment in Davos a few years ago. Michael Dell, the computer guy, he gets up there, he says, name a country where these 70, 80% tax rates worked. Well, Rutger gets up on stage later, he's like, who is this Michael Dell man? He says, where do these 70% tax rates work? The United States, you idiot. The United States, 70, 80, 90% tax rates, and people were happy. By golly, we're here to make people happy. And there's one way to do it, and that is taxation, which did not come up. It is a definition in here. Taxation, the best, most efficient tool governments have to prevent wealth concentration and stop the Broligarchs. Because here's the trick. We don't actually need their money to do things. The next speaker is Stephanie Kelton, author of The Deficit Myth. She's going to talk to us about why we don't have to have their money, and yet we still have to tax them. Stephanie, come on up.
Well, thank you very much. I can still say good morning, right? It's so nice to be back with you. I was here, I think, for the inaugural conference, if I'm right, Erica, 4 years ago. Was that the first time you did this? And I was here, and I admit that I came with what was then a very unconventional sort of take, given the nature of what this organization is about, trying to tax the rich. And very often, it is about finding the money. You know, it's the old Willie Sutton joke. Why did you rob the bank? Because that's where the money is. Why do you want to tax the rich? Because that's where the money is, right? Well, I come at this with a different lens. And so I only have 10 minutes, and I don't want to eat into anybody else's time, so I'm going to move pretty rapidly through this. If I confuse you, if I intrigue you, there is a book, there is a documentary. You can learn more. The documentary is called Finding the Money. The book, as Erica mentioned, is called The Deficit Myth. So I'm going to introduce you, at least some of you, I imagine, to a bit of a different way of thinking about the role of taxes. Why do we have taxes after all? What is it we want to accomplish through the tax system? And I want to make the case that it's about more than raising revenue to pay the government's bills. And I think that's the wrong way to think about it. So long before there were oligarchs like Elon Musk and David Sachs and some of the other people we've heard about today, when I was young and up and coming, it was Peter G. Peterson. That was the guy that was the thorn in my side. And I focused a lot of attention on this guy. And those of you who operate in and around the Hill will know this name well, because he funds an awful lot of activity, organizations that take place around here. And I believe, and have always believed, that what he does is weaponize myths and misunderstandings, take advantage of how little the general public knows, and indeed our politicians know and understand about how the monetary system works and the nature of government finance. How does it all actually work? People don't know. And guys like Pete Peterson have taken advantage of our lack of understanding and weaponized it to give us stories like this. Okay, this is the conventional view. I think every single point here is wrong. The conventional view is that governments, just like a household or a private business or a mayor or a governor, have to find the money in order to be able to spend. All right? What they can't generate through revenue, they have to borrow from savers. Yeah? To cover the deficit, they've got to go out and find savings. Problem is, there's only so much money out there to be loaned to governments and to businesses. In economics, we call this the loanable funds market. We imagine there's a finite pool of dollars out there, and everybody's got to compete for those dollars. When businesses want to borrow and invest, they need to go to savers. But when the government doesn't tax enough and there's a shortfall, the government has to get into competition with the private sector and compete for those scarce dollars, that pool of resources. Now that competition does what? Well, it drives up the price of money. And so interest rates go up, and you get what economists refer to as crowding out. Government competes with the private sector, driving up interest rates. Higher interest rates elbow out some of the private sector's investment, which of course would have been more productive, more useful. And so what you end up with is government taking savings to do less productive things, so that in the end we get a slower growing, less dynamic, more lethargic economy, because the government has intruded in order to borrow to cover the deficit, to finance things that are less efficient in the end. So the lesson is, deficits put you at risk because those funds have been borrowed. That means piling on debt, which has to be paid back. That risks our children and grandchildren. This is Pete Peterson's message. And so by God, you ought to avoid borrowing at all costs and raise the revenue you need if you want to pay for something, okay? We all have been told this, right? Pretty much our whole lives. So I think all of that is wrong. What they've done is drill into our heads the myth that the government's finances operate like a household's finances, that it's got to get the money first from somewhere, either tax or borrow, before it can spend. So this is a graphic from a recent CBO report. Everybody's familiar with the Congressional Budget Office. They present this image. Now notice what they want us to see. First thing you see is what's coming in. You see the revenue first. So government's collecting revenue from income tax, corporate payroll tax, corporate income tax, payroll tax, and fees and other sorts of things, right? The money comes in, you collect about $4.4 billion, and after you've got the tax revenue, you spend, all right? And you spend on Social Security and Medicare and education and infrastructure and all the rest of it. And so you've got your outlays. Problem, outlays are larger than receipts. So what do you end up with? A $1.8 trillion deficit. And all of the hysteria that is wrapped around the word deficit and the idea that we have borrowed and now have driven up the debt. So this is the story the CBO presents us with. It is perfectly consistent with everything that Margaret Thatcher ever said, and we've bought into this by and large, when Thatcher says it's your tax money that pays for public spending. The government doesn't have any money of its own. There's only taxpayer money. Whether you pay me today or pay me tomorrow, you are going to end up paying for whatever it is the government does. Right? That's all wrong. Every single sentence there is wrong. Every sentence. So how does the government actually spend? Well, it starts with a decision by Congress. It starts with the votes. They say, we are willing to do X, Y, or Z, infrastructure, chips and science, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, the CARES Act, whatever it is, the Biden stimulus. We say yes, and there is an appropriation. The word appropriation being key. There is an appropriation. Once that is done, and the votes are there, the legislation writes down the instructions. This is what Congress has decided to do. We're going to send a $1,400 check to most people in this country. We're going to top up unemployment benefits so that this is in the early phase of the pandemic. People are going to get $600 a week, right, in expanded, enhanced unemployment benefits. And so we're giving instructions. What happens after you send the instructions? Well, they go to the government's bank. The government's fiscal agent is the Federal Reserve. And it is the job of the Fed to carry out payments that have been authorized by Congress on behalf of the US Treasury. That's what the Fed does. How does it do that? It uses a computer. It uses the computer keyboard to credit the appropriate bank accounts. If the government said, if Congress said send somebody $600, you get a credit to your account, $600. If they say send a $1,200 check, boom, you get a credit to your account. Social Security payments, it's all debits and credits. When government spends, it does so by changing the numbers up in some account. This leads to a credit to what are called settlement balances or bank reserves. So reserve balances go up in the banking system, and the deposit account of some beneficiary, some individual, some company, their account is credited. All of that is new money creation. Every penny, always and everywhere. There is no other way for it to work. So if somebody says to you, Kelton came in and told us the government should just print money to pay the bills. Wrong. Kelton came in and told you the government pays all of its bills in one way and one way only, by crediting accounts, and that is new money creation every time. There's no other way for it to work. But people don't understand that. Okay, so what we should do is flip Margaret Thatcher on her head. I would have liked to have done that. And flip this graphic around so that we get the sequencing right, so that we understand that it starts with the spending. The government has to spend the dollars into existence and into our hands before we can have them to either pay taxes or buy government bonds. We've got the sequencing wrong. We think they need our money. It's the other way around. The government's funding the taxpayer, not the other way around. So you've got to understand when the government does all that spending, it's crediting accounts, 6.2 trillion and change. When we pay taxes, it debits our account, okay? So what is left over is our financial surplus. The government's deficit is mirrored, matched by a financial surplus that goes into some other part of our economy. Every deficit is good for someone. The question is, for whom and for what? What are those deficits helping us to accomplish? Whose pockets are those dollars going into? All right? So think of it, everybody in this room, I'll bet you, has an airline miles account with Delta or American or United or something. Everybody in this room has one of these, am I right? Is there anybody in this room that doesn't have a miles account? Okay, so everybody knows. So where do the points come from? Where do the miles come from? Did you ever stop and think about that? Like, I used my credit card and I got some miles in my account. I took a flight and I got some miles in my account. Delta is changing the numbers up in your SkyMiles account. They're keeping track of it. What happens when you book a flight and you say, I'm going to use some of my miles because I'm going to take a trip, draw down my account? They debit your account. You're redeeming some of your miles. They change the number down in your account. Delta doesn't get anything. They don't now have some SkyMiles that they can use to award to somebody else. They don't sweep miles from somebody else's account to put into your account in order to give you miles. They don't borrow miles from anybody. It works exactly the same way with the government, right? It is debiting and crediting accounts. When you write a check to the IRS, and I know some of you are going to write some big checks, when you write a check to the IRS, your check is in a set of instructions to your bank, telling your bank to debit your account. And your number on that check tells them by how much to reduce the balance in your account. you're redeeming your dollars, which are tax credits. You're saying, redeem me from my liability to you, to the federal government. That's what's happening. Okay, so we got to get the sequencing right. We have to understand that you have to credit accounts before you can debit them. The government spends first, and then it can come in and tax or sell securities and remove dollars that way. So don't think of revenue. That's my big message. We don't want to focus on the revenue aspect of all of this. And this used to be something, by the way, that economists understood pretty damn well. In the 1940s and the 1950s, nothing I've said would have been surprising, alarming, or disagreeable to the majority of economists or policymakers. They understood this stuff. So here's this guy named Beardsley Rummel. How's my time? Give me a number. How many minutes do I have? Like a minute. Oh, here's this guy, Beardsley Rummel. This guy, Beardsley Rummel, they used to call him chairman of the Federal Reserve. Now we call him president. He was the head of the New York Fed. He wrote this piece called Taxes for Revenue Are Obsolete. He said, we're not on a gold standard anymore. We got a fiat currency. The world has changed. We got to stop thinking about the government as needing to tax in order to get revenue. That's wrong. But he said, we got to think about the important role that taxes play in subtracting money from our hands so that we don't end up with an inflation problem, so that the government's own spending to give us health care and education and infrastructure and the rest doesn't combine with all the spending the private sector's doing and drive up inflation. So taxes are important for regulating inflationary pressure. They're important for creating incentives and disincentives to get people to do or not do certain things. And they're important for changing the distribution of income and wealth. And he makes this point clearly. And this is the one we need to focus on today. I worked with Warren Gunnels. He was the staff director on the Senate Budget Committee when I was the chief economist for the Democrats on the committee. And Warren gets very exercised because he sees the Pentagon always getting money, not just the money they ask for, but billions more than they ask for. And he gets enraged and he goes out on Twitter and he says, what are we doing? Congress keeps appropriating money. We spend and spend and spend. How is it that we keep giving more money to the Pentagon? And the answer is right there in the very first step. Congress appropriates. Congress decides, they vote for it, and that's where the money comes from. It comes from the vote. So think of inflation, think of incentives, and most of all, think of the impact of large concentrations of wealth in our economy and the way they are creating so much chaos and so much destruction today. It's inequality, inequality, inequality. That's what we have to get after. We don't need their money, but we do need to take it. 2 of the 5 statements are correct, and the reason we've got to do it is because we ended up with a guy spending $290 million to put a lunatic in the White House. Thank you very much.
Perfect. I once had a contributor give me a $100,000 contribution on their credit card so they could get their frequent flyer miles. I thought, that's how rich people play. That's awesome. All right, so we don't have to tax the rich, but we're going to anyway, because we've got to reduce that amount of power that they have with that money. So I'm going to call up my next guest, Liz Pancotti from Groundwork. She's going to talk to us about, if we're going to do it, let's go big. $10 trillion of taxing the rich. Liz, come on up.
Thanks so much for having me this morning, Erica Morris and the Patriotic Millionaires. I'll try to keep my comments brief because I know I am one of a couple people standing between you and lunch. And others this morning have said many smarter things than I prepared. We're 2 hours, 3 hours almost into this morning without a break, thanks to Erica's pacing. So I figured I'd give everyone a little stretch break. I know many of you in this room, and I think I know the answer to this question, but I'd just like to take a little temperature check. So who here, please stand, believes that our democracy is worth saving? Big stretch. Okay. Stay standing, stay standing. I feel like the Pope or at a Catholic wedding. A second temperature check, stay standing if you believe in increasing taxes on the wealthy. Okay, great. These two things at this point are now inseparable in our economy, and it is simply not possible to be for the former and not the latter. You can sit now. Please be seated. As Michael Waldman talked about this morning, we need democracy reform, we need campaign finance reform, we need voting rights reform, but we cannot save or strengthen our democracy without taking on the tax code. The world's wealthiest man, although a little less wealthy in the last few weeks, Tesla stock is now down 50% since the inauguration, is a few blocks away, effectively in charge of the federal government. He's taking the chainsaw gifted to him at CPAC a few weeks ago and wielding it against the very systems and structures that undergird our economy and democracy. And I'd like to tell the story of how we got here and why it's a story actually about our tax code. Stephanie started this conversation a few minutes ago about the redistributive abilities of our tax code, and those abilities are both in terms of money and in terms of power. Others alluded to this morning, but I want to put a finer point on it. Wealth and income inequality have soared over the last 50 years. The bottom 90% have seen their wealth nearly triple since 1976. Not a terrible return. Maybe some folks are jealous of this one on this particular day in the markets. But for the top 0.01%, they have seen their wealth increase by more than 17-fold. So that top line on the blue graph here is the top 0.01%, and those bottom two blue lines are the bottom 90%, which are roughly tracking the same thing, though you see a large decline for the middle and the bottom during the Great Recession that they have now come back from, but that top 0.01% is still much higher. There may be some of you who say, okay, well, that's wealth, and the bottom 90% mostly make their money from income. And to that, I would say, don't worry, the picture is worse. The bottom 50% have seen their increase over the last 50 years, while the middle 40 have seen 60% increases. And yet, the top 0.01% have seen an increase of nearly 700%. Does anyone here, pop quiz, does anyone here know what the gross national income is? $27 trillion. Does anyone know how much the top 1% holds in wealth? About double that, more than $50 trillion. Thanks to the hollowing out of our tax code, they get to keep a lot more of it in their pockets these days. And the average tax rate for the top 400 richest Americans is now half of what it was 50 years ago. And that's when they're actually paying it. They're using these newfound windfalls to buy the results they want in elections and direct the policymakers they put in office. In 2004, just 20 years ago, $4 billion worth of contributions funded the election cycle. Outside spending in that election was some $450 million, and just $13 million came from billionaires. This past election cycle, nearly $16 billion went into the election cycle, and 100 billionaire families poured about $3 billion of that into the election. And Elon Musk alone accounted for $1 out of every 57 for this election, spending about $280 million. In fact, it's a pretty cheap price for the seat he now wields. Maybe some Democratic donors should have thought about this idea a few years prior. This has two effects. We have concentration of power, both among the wealthy and large corporations, and that inequality is a real drag on our economic productivity. This is bad for both democracy and the economy. There is a way to fix this, and it's the tax code. There are 4 basic goals we should have for tax reform for the sake of both our democracy and our economy: increasing efficiency, increasing revenues, decreasing distortionary behavior, and decreasing inequality. Tax reform that is aligned with these principles would reduce concentration of power, economic and otherwise, and improve productivity. As Stephanie just talked about, we can redistribute that money from the wealthy folks to the public, and therefore there is democracy in how we spend it. As opposed to Elon Musk getting to choose to spend his $280 million on buying the seat that he now holds, that $280 million or some portion of it could be held in the public coffers for public good. There are a million ways to do this. Here are some ideas. We could remove tax advantages for capital income. Right now, the bottom 90% earn most of their income from working. The top 10% earn most of their income from capital, either from businesses that they own or from assets, or from intergenerational wealth that they themselves did not earn. That income is taxed at a much lower rate than ordinary income, even at the bottom of the marginal tax system. And if we simply equalized rates for capital income and for labor income, that would, one, raise a lot of revenue, and two, change the incentives in our economy. We could tax wealth as it is accrued. Capital gains should be taxed on a mark-to-market basis so that we are not just sitting on large sums of money the wealthy can borrow against and then not pay taxes on when they pass it on to their children or other heirs. In that sense, too, we should reduce generational wealth transfers by expanding the base of the estate tax and repeal stepped-up basis. Only about 3% of wealth passed through estates is actually taxed at this point. Wealthy people can hold what they have, borrow against it to make it bigger, pass it on to their children, and pay virtually nothing in taxes for generations. We could easily change that, and it would raise a lot of revenue. We could also reform investment retirement accounts, which are largely just tax-advantaged vehicles for the wealthy. In fact, trillions of dollars are held in these accounts. There are many, many tax advantages for them, and the vast majority of it is held in the top 10%. Most workers do not have $25,000 a year to put in their 401ks, and given the decline in defined benefit pensions, much of these assets are held now by the wealthy, and in fact, very few in the bottom have retirement assets to speak of at all, while Republicans are socializing the idea of privatizing or ending Social Security altogether. We could improve the progressivity of the income tax by increasing tax rates at the top. As Erica said earlier, the marginal tax bracket at the top is about 37%. At one point, it was in the 60s and 70s and even higher. We could put it back at that level with actually positive economic effects. Further, we could decrease avoidance opportunities so that the wealthy actually pay the tax rates that are on the books. We tried to do some of this in Biden's so-called Inflation Reduction Act by modernizing the IRS, and Republicans have all but gutted the entire enforcement budget at the IRS. So whatever our tax code looks like, it doesn't really matter if there are no cops on the beat to enforce it. Critically, these reforms would take a large portion of wealth out of the hands of a few and put it in the hands of the many. And so our pitch today to you is that tax policy is inherently democracy policy. It's time our legislative efforts link the two, and we cannot look for democracy reforms without reforming our tax code. I'm told to speed run this, so I hope I hit my time there. Okay, great.
That's line. I did not know how sexy taxes were till I started working on them. And they are the sexiest of all the issues. Does everybody think they're sexy? Taxes are so sexy. It's like right there, money and democracy, power, all of it. I mean, what's cooler than that? So, Damon talked earlier about we can have some good ideas. Some good ideas, good. You gotta have that power to implement those good ideas. Here's a quote from Margaret Mead. She said, never underestimate the power. I don't have my quote up here, that's all right. I'm gonna say it. Never underestimate the power of a small group of committed people to change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And in 1964, after Barry Goldwater got defeated, those people committed that small group. Boy, 60 years later, what a pain in the neck we're having to deal with. Now, so let's commit ourselves. Now, I'm gonna pull up two of my favorite people. First, my good buddy Abigail Disney, who has been such an incredible voice on this stuff for so long. Abby, I can't think of a better person to kick off this discussion. Thank you.
Hey y'all, should I grab one of these or does this work? Does this work? Okay, good. I'm gonna take us back one step from the small group thing because there's a tiny missing piece of the conversation about Broligarchy. It is always possible that the men in this room do not like that expression, Broligarchy, but I'm here to make it safe for you, so don't panic, anybody. So here's the thing. You guys are not the problem.
But why has Broligarchy taken hold? Why is this expression really just front and center and top of mind right now? So this is why I'm qualified to tell you about it. I am, in spite of the fact that I was raised by a woman that would make Phyllis Schlafly look like a teddy bear, I am my entire adult life a card-carrying, flame-throwing, patriarchy-hating, unashamed, hairy armpit feminist. Okay? And actually, I do shave my armpits, but then. So I'm here to teach you about two basic truths that might surprise you. The first one being, we don't hate men. We actually really kind of like them. And some of my best friends are men. So just get that one out of your head. That is not a thing, okay? It's not men per se that are the issue. The problem is a particular kind of a man who represents a minority of men. And if all you are fed is what Hollywood's feeding, you might think he's a typical man. But he's not. In real life, that has never been my experience of the men in my life or the men that I know and love. The men we associate with Broligarchy are the emotionally stupid men, Jeff Bezos, psychologically underdeveloped men, Mark Zuckerberg, damaged men, Elon Musk, or overindulged and spoiled rotten men like Donald Trump. These are the kind of men who put more faith in aggression as a means of problem solving than in something like, common sense. And like they say, if all you have is a hammer, everything is gonna look like a nail, especially if you have the money to buy 1 billion hammers. Tension around this kind of masculinity has been building for a long time, and feminists have made themselves wildly unpopular by pointing it out. Nobody wants to hear it, but it's been boiling, and this didn't come from nowhere. Even the men I love and respect in my life have been reluctant to see the problem, but we need to bring it up right now. I want you to know that no less than Rahm Emanuel himself has called me shrill, so. I know, I'm very proud of that. And actually, I was talking about Bernie Sanders, so go figure. For all the advancements feminists have supposedly made, all the pay raises and TV presidencies and time spent on space stations, CAO appointments, and all of that are causing the he-men like Andrew Tate to go scurrying to their Romanian hidey holes, the rates of violence against women have never changed. Not even a little. Now, you think I just threw this huge non sequitur in here. What has violence got to do with anything? But I tell you, we've tried everything. I mean, I went to college in 1978. We marched. We made TV shows. We made movies. We took back the night. We asked you to stop slut-shaming. We developed whole academic disciplines to study the question and all the slogans in the world. And yet, this thing has not moved. We are talking about Broligarchy, and it does matter to talk about violence. The essence of the difference between men and women is this very simple thing, and I completely understand why it's not a thing that men have in the front of their minds. It's not about complicated math problems, and it's not about who knows how to do directions better, and I concede I'm terrible reading a map, but it's that one group of us is physically smaller, weaker, and slower than the other group. And in order to move through the world freely and without fear of assault, we depend upon men to not take advantage of these resources to hurt, maim, or kill us. Now, you'd be amazed to walk into a room full of women, as I very often do, and ask for a show of hands about how many women in the room have been sexually assaulted or raped. I mean, I wish I could, the angel it takes Jimmy Stewart so he can watch the future without anybody seeing him. I wish I could take all the men I know into those rooms to because women will only do it in rooms full of women. But you'd be amazed at how many hands go up.
sometimes I worry that the people think being raped or sexually assaulted, it's not as big a deal as being murdered, and why are we making such a big deal out of this? But in my experience, it's a life changer, completely and utterly. I spent a lot of time in war zones and talking to women who've been raped in war, and this one woman in Bosnia said to me, when I was raped, I became a refugee inside my own body. So I can tell you that it's a very, very big deal. Now, I'm going to lighten the mood up again, so don't panic. I know we always go there, but we'll bring you back. The vast majority of the time, women get through their days just fine because the vast majority of men are not monsters. In fact, they're lovely. But as long as there's this swath of men mixed in with the general population, you remember Donald Trump Jr. talking about the M&Ms, the one green M&M and the bowl of yellow M&Ms. That's kind of how it works for us. We never know which one's the bad M&M. So let's take it back to Broligarchy. What has this all got to do with Broligarchy? Well, we've been trying to warn you, we feminists, we shrill, obnoxious feminists, have tried to say that if you let this version of masculinity go unchallenged, if you let it run amok, then eventually we're all going to suffer, and you're going to suffer right next to us. At some point, this will stop being the sad story that affects some poor lady over there, and it's going to come for you. And that's where we are. I kind of want to say I told you so, but, you know. Adolescence. Has anybody seen Adolescence? Adolescence is brilliant. You must watch it. It's on Netflix. It's really one of the best made things I've seen in many, many years. But it's an adolescent boy at 13 years old. He looks like an angel. He looks like the sweetest, most harmless little boy. But he's been saturated in 8 to 10 hours a day of Andrew Tate videos and the most gross porn in the world. And nobody in his family has any idea. They're terribly nice, and nothing in the culture and nothing in his family would indicate to him there's anything unusual or wrong with what he's being indoctrinated in. So he's a perfectly lovely boy who's been sort of psychologically and spiritually slaughtered by an idea of masculinity that's taken hold. And imagine that 13-year-old boy now with $1 billion in his pocket. This is what we're talking about when we talk about Broligarchy. Paul Piff is a sociologist who's done really great work that talks about when you have money, do you get meaner? And it's interesting that he's shown that the more money you have, the less shame you feel, and this is exactly how corruption turns into kleptocracy, right? If you got no shame, you don't need to stand in the shadows anymore. You can do right out there in front of everybody. In fact, the more money people have, the ruder they get, the less empathy they have, the more likely they are to show off their money, the less attuned they are to the role luck has played in their lives. They're more likely to believe that people who don't have their life deserve what they've gotten, and the more likely they are to cheat at work. It's a science. That's what the numbers are. Now layer over this what money does to you. An unhealthy dose of the wrong, or the high T alpha male, as Elon Musk puts it, the wrong kind of testosterone. And what you get is a Broligarchy in which the very people who should be least entrusted with power are driving us over the cliff. So back to Margaret Mead. We remember when she said this to us. She's not a high T alpha male at all. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. When I think of these words today, all I can think about is Project 2025, because that's exactly what happened. That was a small group of committed individuals. But the thing is, the difference with them was they had a shit ton of money, an oversupply of arrogance, a paucity of scruples, stuffed full of certainty and lacking empathy, and they're just a supercharged version of what Margaret Mead is talking about. They've done some serious, serious damage. So I've got 3 pieces of good news for you. The first is that it sure looks to me like now that their dreams are coming through and they've run in the finish line and they're just celebrating and they seem really happy. Have you noticed they seem to be running out of ideas? Yeah, it's kind of slowing down, because if you're in there to tear everything down, there's only so much you can do. And if you're in there to build things up, then there's kind of no limit. So we have an advantage here of we're on the side of dreaming it better when all they need to do is taken down. The second is that the world is with us. The whole world is with us. We are not a small group. We are most of us. And I always wonder what Margaret Mead would make of that. And the third is we've got money too. We've got money. We don't have as much money as they have, but we got money. And God knows we've learned so much. I hope, God, please, we've learned from the mistakes that we've made over the last few years. So the future is ours to craft. The only thing that we might or might not have is the courage, and time will tell. But what it all comes down to is this. We are the next big group. We're on deck. We're taking our warm-up swings, loosening up for our at-bat. And it's time. It's time. Do you have the moral imagination to craft a new world? And that brings us to Rutger Bregman. Because Rutger wants to talk to us about moral ambition. Where are you, Rutger? Come on up. Come on up. So we're going to sit and talk about it. Rutger's whole story is not summed up in Davos, but that was pretty awesome. And he got some spontaneous applause, and the people at Davos are not known for anything spontaneous, God knows. So tell me about the School for Moral Ambition. Tell me, what do you even mean by moral ambition?
Sure. So, as Senator Cory Booker recently told us, we are living through a moral moment. I think this is really a moment where people of some kind of privilege, whether it's talent, whether it's human capital, whether it's financial capital, cultural capital, like, we need to step up. That is absolutely essential. That is really what moral ambition is all about. It's about the desire to use your precious time on this earth to do as much good as possible. It's not about, hitting a few boxes here and there. It's not about the moral minimum. We've had many movements like that. We have had business leaders saying, oh, you can do good by doing well. You can do some ESG on the side. That is not nearly enough. We face the risk of an autocratic breakthrough in the next couple of years. So especially people like us, we really need to step up. So that's why this is a pretty personal project, and that's what we got to talk about. Yeah.
So when have you seen a small group of committed people, or in history, what have you studied around their effectiveness?
So my very favorite example in history is the British abolitionist movement. They were, in my view, the original patriotic millionaires. Yeah. So in the late 18th century, they kickstarted the greatest movement for social justice that I think the world has ever seen. It was the mother of all movements. All the other movements came out of that. Feminism, the women's rights movements, the suffragettes, but also the rights for the movement for children's rights, the union movement, etc. You could argue that it started in the late 18th century in Britain. And as I studied that movement, I discovered that it was founded by 12 individuals. One of them was a writer. So there is a place for someone like me. One of them was, you could argue he was a corporate lawyer, so sometimes these people can be useful. But 10 out of 12 were entrepreneurs. People who had built their own companies, who had scaled their own companies, who were quite wealthy. Some of them were also inheritors, who were philanthropists. They had climbed that first mountain of success, and they were like, now the next mission is there. I'm going to build a legacy that really, really matters. Now, we got to remember, abolitionism was like, that was worse than veganism today, right? It was very unpopular. It would be very, very toxic to talk about abolishing the slave trade and slavery. People would really, really strongly dislike you if you would go there. It was actually quite dangerous as well. You had to fear for your life. But the fact that it was founded by this group, that it was driven by entrepreneurial people, that really fascinated me. Because when I compared it to other movements, for example, the Dutch abolitionist movement, that got nothing done. It was just a bunch of preachers and Calvinists who, really got nothing done. And then in France, it was a bunch of writers and intellectuals. Well, you can expect what happened there, also not much. In Portugal, there was nothing. In Spain, there was nothing. But you really need these entrepreneurial people. A lot of you in this room, I think, are like that. Who aren't, just about, let's analyze what's wrong with the system, but who also think, how can we actually change it? I come from the political left, and a lot of my friends, they're really good at what we've been doing for the past 3 hours, making these grand analyses of what's wrong with the system. But sometimes I wonder whether there's something called the left-wing excuse, right? We know what the right-wing excuse is. That is you look at all these problems and you say, well, people should just pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, right? It's all about individual responsibility. Just do it. Believe in yourself. We know that's BS. But there's also something called the left-wing excuse, and that's, looking at all these problems and then saying, oh, yeah, it's all the fault of capitalism. It's all the fault of neoliberalism. It's all the fault of this system. We need systemic change. Anything to avoid looking in the mirror. And that brings us back to the Margaret Mead quote. It's small groups of thoughtful, committed citizens who change the world. So yes, there is a place for individual responsibility, especially if you have the means, especially if you can actually make a difference.
So 2 sentences, don't glare at me. I'm going to do the Adrian Brody thing here. What's the School for Moral Ambition?
Yeah, so I've been fascinated by this extraordinary waste of talent that's been going on for quite some time now. We've seen it happening since the 70s. I think it's intimately connected to the increase in inequality and the plummeting tax rates. In the 60s, a lot of Ivy League graduates would go on and work for universities or for the government. But ever since then, we've seen the growth of what a friend of mine calls the Bermuda Triangle of talent. So that is consultancy, it's corporate law, and it's finance. It's sucking up so many of our so-called best and brightest who, then are vanished in this dark chasm, and we never hear from them again. I think that is one of the great problems of our time. Actually, we need really talented people to work on some of the most pressing issues. So I've co-founded an organization called the School for Moral Ambition, and we like to see ourselves as the Robin Hoods of talent. Robin Hood famously took away the money from the rich. It's a very worthwhile effort, and he gave it to the poor. But we also need to take the talent from the rich. There are some, actually there are quite a few class traders in this room tonight. I know there are also some former wealth managers, who actually worked on the other side and who decided to jump ship. We need much more of that. I think we already have a lot of awareness around what the problem is. In that sense, you could argue we've already won the fight. Like the vast majority of Americans, is in favor of higher taxes on the rich. But now we need a lot of dedicated people, like SWAT teams of brilliant, former wealth managers, corporate lawyers, bankers, you name it, to actually make it happen. So that's what we're going to do. We're launching next month, actually. We organize these really prestigious fellowships, pretty hard to get into, of very dedicated people who actually want to devote their career to this. We started in Europe last year with the fight against big tobacco, but I came to America in September of last year to also start working on tax fairness.
All right. I'm in. Thank you all.
Thanks.
I don't know if I've ever loved a phrase as much as the School for Moral Ambition. That's a really good one. Let's take that moral ambition and turn it into action. How do you get more and more people involved in the exercise of moral ambition? I'm going to call Helene Olin, editor of the Economic Liberties Project, Ashley Allison, CEO of Watering Hole Media and a CNN contributor, and Anna Marie Arkila from the Working Families Party. Up. Moral ambition into action.
Hey, can everybody hear me? Yeah. Okay, hey there. So when Erica asked me to do this, she forgot to tell me that everybody got to make a statement at the beginning here. So this is when I remember I'm quite shy, but I will open this up by saying this has been an amazing conference. And going off of everything that's been said this morning, American capitalism, American society, the American oligarchy, one of the ways it persists the way it does is because it excels on division and self-blame. It preaches a sort of dog-eat-dog society, looking out for number one, and blaming yourself or others when things don't go right? I've been known to joke that, it's not true that we don't have a state religion in this country. We do. It's the First National Church of Self-Help, where everything is your fault. No matter what you did, no matter what went wrong for you, it's your fault. And the only socially permissible thing we're allowed to do to get away from that is to blame another. And the other is always beneath us, as preached by, the Broligarch types. Below us, somebody, lower, of a lower class status, of a different race, different ethnicity, different sexuality, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm trying to do on this panel is to get us away from this and move us forward into the great world that was just described by Abigail and our other speaker, and ask these two wonderful people, Ashley Allison, who's a CNN commentator, Anna Maria Archia, right? Archia, the co-director of the New York Working Family Party. How can we do this? How do we get beyond both self-blame and blaming the other, while doing that in a society that both encourages it and, as we have sort of learned over the past several years, does enormous pushback when you try to center misogyny, racism, et cetera, economic interest in the culture. So I'm going to sort of throw this open to both of you, and I'm going to start with you, Ashley, because you're next to me.
Okay.
How do we move forward from this moment? How do we move forward? What steps do we take? How do we reach people?
Good afternoon. Yeah, okay. Good afternoon, everyone. A pleasure to be with you. So, a couple of things. I work in media. The work I do is reaching communities online through digital infrastructure. And one of the things that the right and people who want to keep us all isolated do is they find these communities online. Somebody was mentioning adolescents, and they really allow people to show up as who they are, whether you like who they are or not. And by doing that, they start to tell these stories to these individuals that they're a part of the Broligarchy, right? Even though they'll never have the billions and millions of dollars that these folks, and they start telling them, be a part of our community, be a part of our community. And by doing that, they all think, the young person from my hometown in Youngstown, Ohio has the aspirations that he too will be like Elon Musk. And they isolate these individuals, and they tell them that everyone else that is different than them is the problem. Well, what do we do to stop that? It's not the assignment for everyone, but sometimes you have to go places where you feel uncomfortable and talk to people who you don't agree with and you disagree with and say, you're not like them. They don't think you're like them either. They are not telling you the truth. And we might not agree on everything, but you're more like me than you are like them. You might look different than me. You might be a different gender than me, a different color than me, a different racial background or religious background. But the reality is that we probably have more economic alignment than you do. And if you come and have a conversation with me, we can collectively be together and push back on the Broligarchs. But we don't always do that, because people say things. I don't always do it. I don't always have the emotional capacity to talk to people I don't agree with. But we have to, or we're going to stay stuck and things will get worse. But I often talk about, I tell stories, and this is not how my story ends. So I have to do some things to make sure that I'm writing the story that I want, and the story does not end with the bros winning. It just doesn't.
I really appreciate that question, because I think one of the things that is challenging about this moment is that the pillars of the Broligarchy are really deeply ingrained in our culture. This country deeply believes that individuals exist separate from one another, that self-care is the way that you survive whatever challenge or difficulty in your life, that self-interest, that's the language that we use in the left to organize people, self-interest, separating people into distant, different, isolated units, when in reality, our experience is everything but. It's everything but. in this moment, we have an incredible opportunity, actually, to talk about all the things that we have in common. Because the fact is the Broligarchs are attacking everything and everyone. They're going after our rights, they're going after our unions, they're going after our jobs, they're going after our communities, they're going after our ability to speak in dissent of our government. And so this is a moment where we have to say, you're not alone, we are not alone. What we saw on April 5th, who was out in the streets on April 5th? Who came out to march? Beautiful. Millions of people. I was in New York City, helped organize the action in New York City. We told the police there were going to be 1,000 people. We expected 30,000, but 100,000 showed up. This is the moment. This is the moment. We are in that moment where people are saying, first, I don't want to be alone. I want to be with others. Second, I know that I have something to do. I have something to contribute. And across difference, even across the widest political difference, people have something to contribute and people have someone they care about. So the challenge for us is to build spaces where people feel like they are welcome. And that, I think, for the left, is a stretch sometimes. Sometimes we build political communities that feel exclusive, that feel unwelcoming, and we perpetuate a sense of separation. The Working Families Party was created in 1998 in the wake of NAFTA, in the wake of welfare reform, precisely as a response to the democratic policies that we knew were going to put a wedge between the Democratic Party, quite frankly, and working class people. And those policies created the perfect storm of pulling the rug from under the families, of working families, and creating the environment for a lot of isolation and despair. The fact that we are here is not surprising. What is surprising is the strength of the Broligarchy right now, and the agility and the speed at which they are imposing an extremely, extremely dangerous and radical agenda. Their speed is astonishing and shocking, but it is also the reason why thousands of people are showing up. So I agree that, Patriotic Millionaires needs to focus on taxes and wages, but we have to understand that our people are coming to the streets about everything. They're not just coming to the streets because of Elon Musk, they're coming to the streets because they're about to lose their healthcare, because they're about to lose their Medicaid, because their transgender child cannot access healthcare, because they cannot have an abortion, because. So we have to welcome the connections and not repeat the mistake. When people start talking about all the things that we don't want them to talk about, start making the mistake of telling them to shut up. So the first thing we have to do is build spaces where people can bring whatever concern they have. And then make sure that those spaces are not just protests, but are durable political communities. That's what we have to do.
And how would you... And how do we do that exactly, right? Because the thing I can tell you of actually... Usually I say, I'm one of the few people in the room who can remember the 1970s, but that's not probably true in this room, unfortunately, for all of us, is, you learn that in stagflationary environments and economically troubled times, people tend to be more divided, not less, right? So how do you surmount that? How do we get over that? What can we practically do to make everybody welcome, to reach out and get people to show up? To stop, not give in to the self-blame, to not give in to the divisiveness in our society. And this is a question for both of you.
Well, I think you have to do a couple of things. One, we lead a lot of our work through culture, and people are like, "What does that mean?" It means how many people have been on their phones listening and yet on their phones, right? You get a lot of culture thrown at you through this. So whether it is I'm on Instagram and I'm hearing how Cardi B is feeling some type of way while the man, I forget his last name, is freaking out because he's lost millions of dollars, and he runs Barstool Media, which is like where so many men go and get their information from, or whatever it may be. We start a lot of our work with where people are rather than demanding they come to where I am. Most people are never coming, sorry guys, but most people are never coming to the Patriotic Millionaires for a couple reasons. One, they're never going to be millionaires, and two, they don't even know rooms like this exist. So we can decide that we're going to stay in our conference rooms and learn and not ever actually interact with the people we need to win, or we can march. But a lot of people are never going to go to a march on April 5th. And that doesn't mean they're not going to be on our side, and it doesn't mean we get to say you're the problem. Instead, we need to go to where people are offline and online and do what you were saying, is having those conversations. Now, everything they say, I'm going to say it again. Everything they say, you're not going to like. And everything you say, they're not going to like. But if we shut down, we are in a shutdown moment, literally, where something happens to you, you don't like it, and you have the privilege to walk away. Well, we can walk away, but it's not going to solve our problems, and we have to dig deep. And again, everyone doesn't have to do it at all times. That's why we have a bunch of folks to do it in community. But we can't talk about being in community, and then when somebody comes into our community and they aren't exactly the way we want, be like, no, go find your own community. Well, they will. Mm-hmm. They will, and they have. And so we have to decide, do we want people to come back? Now, I'll say all that, and I'm not tolerating any nonsense, okay? Mm-hmm. Like, I don't have to put myself in harm's way. I don't have to experience trauma. I'm allowed to be safe, and I can have an open heart, too.
Mm-hmm. So you know, the Working Families Party is a real party for those of you who are not familiar with us.
You all organized me back in the early 2000s.
We did.
Yeah. I learned how to do a one-on-one through the Working Family Party in Brooklyn, New York.
There you have it.
Fourth generation New Yorker here.
We organized Ashley. We helped elect Tish James for her first election and to City Council, just on the Working Families Party line. Tish James, the Attorney General of New York, who is battling Trump very valiantly. And we are very determined to having a being a political expression that is very focused on the things that are sort of the material things in people's lives. Housing, healthcare, childcare, jobs, wages, and electing people who will actually prioritize those things. And the reason why I say that is because you can have a conversation about the cost of childcare with anyone of any political affiliation. And it is a common ground of how difficult it is for families to care for their children, to care for their elders. It is common ground, increasingly more across the country, about how difficult it is to afford housing, how difficult it is to afford healthcare. And so we need to make sure that in the moment of elections, we are actually talking about the things that matter to people most. So that's what the Working Families Party is dedicated to. But I want to flag for people here that a lot of the infrastructure of the progressive world, community organizations, or progressive organizations, unions, are under severe threat. That what we are going to see, we already saw Trump declaring that federal workers, firing thousands of federal workers, declaring that the bargaining, the contracts, can be ignored, and we are gonna have to remake ourselves in the next several years into something that cannot be dismantled by a government. And I think that remaking of the ecosystem of progressive organizations is gonna look more like cultural community spaces. Spaces where people can commune around the things that give them joy, the things that bring them life, the things that remind them that they are not alone. And I am asking you all to be alert, be on the alert on the attacks to unions, the attacks to community organizations, to progressive organizations, and to not do what we have often done in the past, which is to say, oh, they fucked up that way. They did this wrong. This is really going to happen. It's going to intensify, and all of us need to recognize it as an effort by this administration to dismantle our ability to move in collective action. And I am asking you to be alert, to support the moment when people are flexing their muscle, when organizations are flexing their muscle, but also to accompany us as we try to remake ourselves into structures that cannot be dismantled by a government.
Okay. Because we've got 2 minutes left, instead of asking another question, I'm going to let Ashley respond and give your last thoughts.
Okay, so just one intervention I would say to maybe expose yourself to something that you're not ingesting right now, because we do digital work. I'm going to give you a couple pages that if you're on Instagram, maybe I don't do X, but if you're on Instagram, maybe you can follow and watch to get some different information. I was not expecting to do this, so I'm going to just scroll through my Instagram real quick. And the reason why is because so often we know how the algorithms work. We know how people think they're having a conversation, and then like you sit next to somebody on an airplane and you're like, wait, when did this happen? Because something new is popping up on your phone. So there's a couple reporters I would say to recommend to you follow if you don't. Obviously, I would follow April Ryan. She has her finger on the pulse right now on what's happening and different attacks that are happening that might not be making it on my CNN panels every single day, but are still extremely important accounts to follow. I would definitely follow the Working Families Party, the work that Maurice Mitchell is doing about really going out in the streets and having conversations with people. It is key. I would recommend following a woman named Reese Colbert, Reecie Colbert. Reese, if you like PG-13 stuff, don't follow Reese, because Reese is not afraid of profanity. But Reese has a really good way of breaking down the around what's happening in Washington, D.C. and making it digestible for a lot of folks. I'll be honest, I'm not a tax person, so I was like trying to follow the presentations, but even I was like, I could use Reese to break it down. So those are just a couple people I would follow just to get a different sense of the conversation that you might not be having right now. That's the first way you can start to expand the community that you're in currently.
I will say for the party, we recognize this moment as a moment when we have to do everything to block fascism. And so that means sometimes it's pushing Democrats to, find the courage of the people in the streets, lend some courage from them, and actually assume the role of opposition party. So it's block the fascists. Don't elect the ones that got us in this mess. For people in New York, do not give Andrew Cuomo a sexual harasser. The person who gave, Elon Musk $1 billion in New York for nothing, the person who created a housing crisis in New York City, the mental health crisis, do not give people like him a welcome back mat into our politics. We actually have to move away from the people that have created the problem we're in. And finally, we have to build. We are dedicated to building a real party. That this country didn't always have a two-party system. It doesn't always need to be a two-party system country. In New York City, we're going to test those muscles this year in the mayoral elections, so talk to me if you're interested. But also just help build more capacity to engage in the cultural spaces where people are, to engage in the community spaces where people are, and to actually just remind people that they are not alone. And I'll say that what I witnessed on April 5th was an incredible display of collective optimism, of courage, of determination, of a commitment to care for one another, and that is going to be absolutely necessary every single day under this Trump administration.
And I think that's where I need to leave this, on a call to remember we are not alone. Thank you both.
This story does not end with the bros winning. I love that sentence. It does not end with the bros winning. A big role and responsibility lies on the people in this room. And as we have talked about today, this is not just a US problem. It is a global problem. About 5 years ago, Patriotic Millionaires partnered up with Oxfam, and we started going to Davos every year. Davos, where all these private planes are flying in for the Broligarchs and the like to sit around and divide up the country. Wealth needs to stand up. Wealth is standing up. Thousands of millionaires from around the globe have joined our call. We now have a chapter of Patriotic Millionaires in the UK, and we've just started a chapter in Canada. I'm going to ask our two international Patriotic Millionaires who are with us today, thank you so much, to come up. Guillaume Rambourg. Guillaume, one of the founding members of Patriotic Millionaires, a former equity fund manager and founder of the Rambourg Foundation. Thanks, Guillaume.
Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be back in DC. This is our second time here after last year's symposium. And it's great to be in such impressive company. So this morning's session's been very rich on content, so I'm not going to add too much there. This is just going to be a testimony of an international member of Patriotic Millionaires. So I used to be on the dark side of the force as a European hedge fund manager, and I know I'm very familiar with how the Broligarchs works, that world, how it works, and the double obsession of always increasing your net worth and decreasing your tax bill. And I still struggle with a lot of my ex-colleagues. They're still in that phase of increasing their wealth all the time and not really caring about what's happening in the rest of the world. But I chose to change course, namely by retiring from finance, setting up a family foundation, and we've been doing our best to help Patriotic Millionaires. So I was born in Canada. I'm actually a French national who grew up here in the US before working in Europe. And so my Tunisian wife, Sarah, who's here today, and we spend now most of our time between London and Morocco, which probably makes us somewhat exotic members of Patriotic Millionaires, which we joined back in 2022, the UK branch, which had just been set up by Rebecca at the time. So we find ourselves in very interesting times, frightening times. Many of us had been warning about the risk of seeing democracy in the hands of very wealthy people, and I think we're there. And in some cases, you could argue that is the silver lining, because the people we were describing this to, warning people about, they can actually see it a few blocks away from here with the tariff a fiasco unfolding today. I've been looking at the markets because I still do. And the market gyrations just today on a rumor of a 90-day stop to the tariffs has been absolutely crazy. So I'm happy I'm not running money anymore. And things are changing very quickly. And that after 54 years. Last night was actually the first time that I worried about U.S. customs, worried about what's on my phone, worried about what's on my social networks, and this is a pretty frightening, turn of events for someone like me who grew up here and who's accustomed to coming here every year, and where it feels like home, to all of a sudden not know if I'm going to be let in, if I'm going to be interrogated, is pretty frightening, and under what law. Because technically, as I haven't gone through customs yet, I'm not protected by any, U.S. law for sure. Now Europe is in shock, looking at the DC spectacle, but actually Europe is taking a similar path. And we saw earlier on Bernard Arnault, so the CEO of LVMH, he was at the inauguration day. He's one of our richest people in France and in Europe. And in similar ways, the extreme right, is dominating in France, UK, even in Germany. And the billionaires are almost not paying any taxes in Europe, but they're doing it pretty quietly while controlling most of the media. So our own call of duty came after Sarah and I had lunch with Abigail Disney, who's here today. This is a lunch we'd bought, a little bit as a fluke at a charity auction. We looked up Abigail on Wikipedia, and she seemed like to have an interesting journey. And we had lunch, and that was our call to action, and that's how we became part of Patriotic Millionaires. So we're hopeful that many of you will now join the cause, and that we ourselves will now become these super spreaders of this call to action. Now I just now as we flew in from Casablanca yesterday, I actually finished Rutger's book, and I was very happy about the quote from Margaret Mead, but it seems like 4 people have stolen my thunder. But we need to be that small group of people that really federates more people to join us and to really make a difference. And we need to start as early as we can. As we said as well, awareness is not enough. Talking about it is not enough. It's really, we need to take action and get results from advocacy. And at Patriotic Millionaires, we have been making a difference. I'll just mention a few things we've done. We've signed letters at Davos, which have resonated with the ultra-rich there. Our efforts have also helped to put the issue of taxing the super rich at the G20 meeting. So again, embryonic at this stage, but the message, I've been pretty impressed by how strong the message has been in London, where we live. So it will take bravery and courage, to ask to be taxed more and to ask others to engage with us. But I think that is really, required at this very seminal moment, to avoid both our governments and our middle class and being just saddled and shackled with unsustainable level of debt. So I call on fellow millionaires to join the movement and to go after extreme wealth and help change the course of history. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guillaume. And Sabina Vohar Miller. Sabina, come on up from Canada. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm short, so I have to always adjust the mic. My name is Sabina Vohar Miller. I'm a new member of Patriotic Millionaires Canada. I'm also a first-generation immigrant to Canada, actually, and I have a classic rags to riches story of being homeless to now being part of the 1%, not something I actually ever envisioned myself growing up to be. I am a public health scientist, actually, which I believe is more important than ever at this time, especially, but of course that does not make millions. I'm here, frankly, because my husband struck it rich. Craig, my husband, was one of the first employees at Shopify, Canada's largest tech company with a market cap of, comme dit-on, I didn't know there was going to be a French-speaking person here, so pardon my French accent, but how do you say more than it needs to be? He left a few years ago, and as he frequently says, it's not just about when you join a company, but also when you leave it. And for good reason. I'm not sure if anyone's been watching what's happening with some of the tech companies, very right-wing shift in the last few weeks or maybe few months. As Ron Fournier wrote during Obama's presidency, American exceptionalism is a recurring character in the nation's narrative. But as much as the US would like to think that Broligarchs are America's gift to the world and unique to America, sadly I'm here to tell you that's not the case. In the same vein, rugged individualism is of course very much woven into the American dream, the pulling up yourself by the bootstraps, the myth of self-sufficiency. And so if you're sick, or if you need medical care, or if you don't have access to wholesome food or suitable housing, that's on you. That's a you problem. Now, while we do have a broader social safety net in Canada, we need to understand that the US is also Canada's largest influencer, from tech to culture to fashion and even medicine, and this is especially true of political movements. where we always seem to be just a few years behind you guys, for better or for worse. So it's no surprise that the same problems of Broligarchy, of rugged individualism over community, and wealth inequality are also occurring in Canada. The difference is we actually have a chance to stop it before what's happening in the US becomes our Canadian reality as well. It just requires urgent and meaningful action to address wealth inequality. The sad truth is the wealth gap in Canada is also increasing rapidly. The top 20% of Canadian households control nearly 65% of the wealth, while the bottom 40% only holds 3.3% of the total wealth. And in fact, the richest 1% control over a quarter of Canada's wealth, amounting to $3.5 trillion. That's a lot of zeros. COVID-19 actually accelerated everything. We know the tech and e-commerce sector had an exceptional advantage during COVID-19. There's actually data to show that an increased number of infected cases and an increased number of deaths caused by COVID-19 actually had a significantly positive impact on stock returns across digital companies. And this led to health policy being dictated not by public health, unfortunately, but by these very same for-profit companies. And so it came as no surprise when Donald Trump Jr. actually targeted me specifically on social media, and what resulted in 3 months of absolute hell. And the billionaire class is using this increase in their fortunes to consolidate their power, wanting to control the government and privatize public services Canadians view as essential. Even in countries like mine, where there are reasonable campaign finance laws to ensure there is less direct pay-to-play political system like there is in the US, we do see undue influence. Whether it's to do with controlling media, both traditional and digital, to hiding behind the legitimacy of think tank structures, to creating extremely well-funded machines for steering and constraining, and in fact, gatekeeping policy conversation. And all of this with unseemingly unlimited funds at their fingertips. The bad news is governments really only have one tool at their disposal to combat the concentration of wealth at the top and the concentration of power that comes with it: taxes. The good news is it's a powerful one, and one that we know works. We need a tax code that is purposely designed to constrain massive inequality. At the moment, thanks to favorable treatment of wealth over income, of asset appreciation over a paycheck, and the ability to pass on massive inherited wealth without effective taxation, the exact opposite is happening. Tax codes around the world are funneling money towards the top, and with that, power and influence, as we see. As a public health scientist, I can tell you one thing very, very clearly. Wealth inequity does not a healthy society make. For a society to survive, everyone needs to thrive. Taxing the wealthy is not only the right thing to do, but it actually leads to better outcomes for everyone. So I'm proud to be part of this vocal and growing international group of wealthy people who are willing to state the obvious. It's time to tax us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabina. I'm the only thing between you and lunch. Let's see how long we can stretch it out. Who's hungry? My stomach started grumbling. It's time to eat. Get together, make merry, and make plans. So here's what we're gonna do. It is time to get to work. Who is ready to get to work? Awesome. All right, I got 5 things for you. We talked about today, capitalism, democracy, they have an inherent tension. We have moved from just a little bit of light corruption to like full-blown kleptocracy. The only way we can preserve our democracy is to tax people out of the excessive amount of money they are using to buy our system of government. And what did that small group of people do? They worked together. They committed. And they worked together over a long period of time. So we've got a group of people here, we've got people watching, and we are going to commit over the long term to fix this. Step number 1 of problem solving is accept the situation. Not because you're not going to change it, because you cannot solve a problem that you don't acknowledge. We are here. And here's the thing that should give you hope. We were going to get here anyway. We've been on this road for 60 years. When inequality in a country reaches a certain mathematical point, you are definitionally vulnerable to authoritarianism. We were on this road, and now we have arrived. And good, because now everybody knows. There's not a secret out there. Everybody knows, and when you know, you have knowledge. When you have knowledge, you have power. And when you have power, you can change the world. Accept the situation. We're here, and we're going to fight this. Number 2, commit to do something that you aren't already doing. Everybody in this room, and probably everybody watching, they're committed to democracy. They're committed to America. They're committed to fairness and basic decency. But are you doing enough? Add one thing. Add one thing every day, every week, every month. Make a commitment to do more than you are doing as you sit here today. What is your daily think, give, do? What do I need to learn? What do I need to give? What do I need to do? Number 3, we want to fix the disease. That cancer is eating us alive. And it is a mathematical cancer that is based on a wage floor that is too low and a tax system that is corrupt and complete nonsense. Focus on the money. Care about all the other things, but spend your time focusing on the money. You can raise minimum wage in counties. You can raise minimum wage in states, not all of them, but some of them, okay, with a ballot initiative. States have tax systems. We can fix this on a granular and a global level if we focus on the money. America 250, the money agenda. That is the answer to the green part of this occasion. Number 4, demand a positive opposition. Not just one that is not quite as shitty as the other guy. Okay? Let's drill down there and demand that we have an opposition force that believes in something that will actually fix the problem. You want to know your last vocabulary word of the day? Throttle bottom. Anybody know what a throttle bottom is? An innocuously inept and futile person in public office. It's time to be done with the throttle bottoms in order to protect our democracy. And last, find that small group of committed people. It can be the women you walk with, it can be your family group chat, it can be patriotic millionaires, it can be non-patriotic millionaires, right? We have highlighted for you a ton of organizations, some incredible efforts. Find the one that works for you. Find your group, that small group of committed people, so that when you're sad and feeling lonely and you can't believe what in the world happened to America, you can call on them for strength. And then take those small groups and make them bigger and bigger and bigger. There's a great quote from one of my favorite books, Madeleine L'Engle book. It's called The Wrinkle in Time. And it's about the ecthroi, the darkness that shadows a planet, shadows planet Earth. It's evil. It's evil. I asked Morris the other day, I said, Morris, these people are crazy. He said, Erica, they're not crazy. They're evil. That's a different thing. Be the light that breaks the darkness. Be the light that shines clear and true. Thank you so much. We deeply appreciate you all. Thank you.